Chapter 263. In order to avoid alerting the enemy, Shi could only wait silently on the rooftop. He sat cross-legged and looked up at the night sky of Chengdu. He felt that the tears of the children had seeped through the walls and soaked the floor. He looked at the group of people gathered under the apartment building. Under the light, they were not human at all, but evil spirits that wandered the dark side of society. Because they had been tied up for a long time, the parts of the children that were bound by the rope had begun to have edema. When Shi saw this scene, he could not help but feel sorry for these children. How old were these children? They were treated like livestock. How much damage would this cause to the children's young hearts? As a human being, at the very least, she did not see any kindness in these human traffickers. Many people always wondered why the human traffickers had their own families. They worked hard just to better take care of their families, but they still did such a heartless thing. In fact, the reason was very simple. In everyone's eyes, children were gifts given to them by God. But in the eyes of human traffickers, children were just goods that could be sold for money. Children were pure and beautiful, and every one of them was so cute. It was not an exaggeration to say that which child was not more likable than Yan. For the parents of children, their children were obviously the most precious treasures in the world. In order to catch these bastards in one fell swoop, Shi waited for a long time, but he also let these poor children suffer for a few more hours of torture in vain. But fortunately, all of this should end. Like a phantom in the dark, Shi's figure suddenly disappeared from the rooftop. When he reappeared, he was already outside the door of the room on the top floor where the children were locked up. It was still the woman in her 30s who was guarding the children. And why was the man not allowed to guard the children? Obviously, it was because there was a little girl here. As a man, there were always times when he could not control himself. This little girl was going to be sold for money. If she was accidentally broken, who would be willing to spend money to buy her? Therefore, in human trafficking organizations, it was usually women who guarded the goods. The door was not locked, and the woman was sitting on a chair not far from the door. She was watching a TV series on her phone. The moment she pushed the door open, the woman heard the sound of the door opening. However, she seemed to be engrossed in watching, so she didn't even raise her head as she spoke in a rather difficult dialect. She didn't pay attention to her, but looked at the children sitting on the ground. It was probably because they were tired from crying that the children were already asleep. Only the little girl who heard the sound of Shi opening the door immediately raised her head and looked outside vigilantly. There was only an old light bulb in the room. Under the dim light, the sudden appearance of a strange man made the girl shrink back in fear. The little girl's movements made a rustling sound. After hearing this sound, the woman in the room finally raised her head impatiently and directly shouted in Shi's direction. She thought it was a pervert who wanted to take advantage of this little girl. This kind of thing happened more than once, so she didn't care at all, but she didn't expect that after looking up, she found that she didn't know the man in front of her at all. The woman was stunned. She was stunned for a second or two. Then her eyes suddenly widened, and she was about to scream. But at the moment when she was about to scream, Shi suddenly stretched out his arm, and the invisible true spirit suddenly clasped the woman's neck like an iron hoop. Want to call for help? The two were at least 2 meters apart. Shi just grabbed in the air, and the woman was suddenly lifted from the chair by him like a chicken. The pressure on her neck made the woman almost suffocated, but she still opened her eyes and mouth, trying to make a sound. Seeing this, Shi said calmly, "I'll help you." After the voice fell, Shi gently waved his arm. The woman's body was like a marionette. Under the pull of an invisible force, she instantly broke the window and flew directly out of the 5th floor. Then the question came. How long would it take for an object to fall freely from the height of a 5-story building to fall to the ground? The answer was, with a muffled sound from downstairs, the entire apartment was alarmed. Like a sudden power outage in the student apartment, screams and footsteps suddenly came from downstairs. This scene happened in front of the little girl, but she stared with her red eyes, as if she didn't come back to her senses at all. Seeing her silly look, Shi couldn't help but smile at her, then he gently snapped his fingers. "Go to sleep, you'll be fine when you wake up." Under the effect of the meditation spell, the little girl leaned weakly against the wall, and her consciousness became more and more blurred. She tried hard to remember the appearance of the man in front of her, but the strong sleepiness made her instantly fall asleep. After the little girl fell asleep, She turned his head to look at the child in the room. After cutting all the ropes with his true essence, he turned and walked out of the room. 30 to 40 people ran wildly in the apartment, and the floor made a bang-bang sound as they stepped on it. Listening to the gradually approaching footsteps, She sighed rather helplessly. It would be great if he could just slaughter all of these scumbags, but he couldn't do that. Because this kind of large-scale human trafficking organization had abducted and sold countless children, he couldn't kill all of these bastards for a moment of pleasure. He had to leave some alive for the police to find the children they had abducted before. After all, there were so many broken families who were still holding on to a glimmer of hope that they could find their children even if they had to use up all their wealth. What a pity, and just as She stood in the corridor thinking about how to deal with these human traffickers, the fastest among them had already rushed in front of him with steel pipes and kitchen knives. Seeing this, She's face couldn't help but darken, and he suddenly made a decision in his heart. In terms of probability, when an earthquake happened, there would always be a few lucky people in a building who would be able to survive. In that case, let God decide who would die and who would live. So, just as the few men were about to rush in front of She fiercely stepped on the floor of the corridor. A huge force suddenly went from the roof to the foundation, and almost instantly shook the load-bearing walls of the entire building. Just like an earthquake, the entire building was like a building that had been crushed, and it quickly collapsed amidst the dust that filled the air. At the same time, She used his true essence to wrap the little girl and the children. After putting the children on the street outside the apartment, She called his sister-in-law's phone. The apartment collapsed, but the number of lucky survivors was beyond She's imagination. This also made him sigh. These bastards' luck was actually so good? Did the heavens have eyes? So, when he ended the call with his sister-in-law, She didn't forget to repeatedly remind her, death penalty, it must be the death penalty. Remember, good will be rewarded with good, evil with evil. If there is no justice in heaven, I will. Chapter 264. The next morning, the whole family was sitting around the dining table, happily eating breakfast. At this moment, the morning news suddenly broadcasted a news flash. Last night, the Chengdu police cracked a huge case of baby trafficking. They arrested 37 suspects and rescued 16 babies. The reporter has called the person in charge of the case, but as the case is still under investigation, the specific details cannot be disclosed for the time being. Then, the TV screen cut to the Wuhou branch. Many parents were anxiously waiting outside the conference room. After receiving the police summons, the parents rushed into the conference room and began to frantically search for their children. Only 16 children were rescued, but there were hundreds of parents present. After all, the police didn't know which family these children belonged to. Therefore, they could only invite the parents who had recently lost their children to come over and hold such a family reunion. The old couple was quite lucky. The first thing they saw after entering was their granddaughter, Ting. The two elders quickly walked to Ting. When they saw the abrasions and edema on the child's body, the old couple could not help but cry on the spot. These were tears of joy, and at the same time, the joy of surviving a disaster. The old couple hugged their granddaughter and cried for a long time. After their emotions had calmed down, they went to the side and began to register under the guidance of the police. The image came to an abrupt end. The camera cut back to the live broadcast room. After a few simple comments, the host smiled and began to broadcast the next piece of news. News always reported the good news and not the bad news. And this reunion was no less than a second blow to the parents who had lost their children. It was fine if they found them, but what if they could not? As the saying goes, the greater the expectation, the greater the disappointment. They came to the reunion with unlimited expectations, but in the end, they could only watch as others found their children, while their own children were still nowhere to be found. How strong did one have to be able to endure such endless torment? Therefore, at the end of the reunion, it would always be filled with the cries of despair of the parents. Those who heard it would be sad and those who heard it would cry. Such a scene was naturally not suitable to appear in the news. As a bystander, Aunt Zhang, like most people, did not delve into the details. Therefore, when she saw the old couple fine Tingting on TV, she couldn't help but laugh and say, "It's good that you found her, it's good that you found her." Speaking of this, Aunt Zhang did not forget to reach out and pat the little girl's head. Then, she pretended to be serious and said to her, "Nian Nian, if you don't listen to me in the future, Grandma will sell you to human traffickers. What do you think?" Hearing Auntie Zhang's words, the little boy was frightened and immediately shook his head like a rattledrum. He pouted and said loudly, "No, you're not allowed to sell me." As it spoke, the little thing burrowed into Qin Ruing's arms. Aunt Zhang couldn't help but laugh out loud at the silly look on his face. "Silly child, Grandma is just teasing you. You are so cute, how could Grandma be willing to sell you?" Qin Ruing comforted her with a smile. Hearing this, the little fellow pouted and snorted, and then expressed its strong dissatisfaction. Children also have human rights. Breakfast ended in such a happy atmosphere. After Kai Shuqin and Xie Pinglin left for work, Aunt Zhang packed up and prepared to bring Qin Shi's family out to play. However, because she still had to take care of her granddaughter, Aunt Zhang was busy for a while and didn't finish packing. During this time, Qin Shi discussed with Qin Ruing softly. The new year was over, so it was about time for them to leave. They couldn't always stay at Aunt Zhang's house and freeload on food and drinks, right? Therefore, after a brief discussion, Qin Shi brought up their plans to Auntie Zhang. After leaving Chengdu, they would go to Zhonghai for a few days to reminisce about the past before returning to Shangjing. After returning to Shangjing, they couldn't let the little girl play so carefree anymore. They had to find a kindergarten for her and let her become a preschool child. This time, she would study seriously in a big class, unlike the past where she would slack off. Therefore, Qin Shi and Qin Ruing didn't discuss with the little girl at all and directly decided everything for her. Although Aunt Zhang was very reluctant, after hearing the detailed plan, she still agreed to it. However, they could leave, but they had to wait until the new year. Since Aunt Zhang had already said so, the husband and wife naturally couldn't go against her wishes, so they followed the old lady's wishes and stayed with her for a few more days until the Lantern Festival. After that, the family went out and prepared to take advantage of the last few days to play all over Chengdu. It had to be said that the internet era was indeed convenient for people's lives. After Qin Shi rented a shared car with his phone, he drove the family happily to Huanglangxi. Chengdu couldn't be compared to Shangjing. There were only a few scenic spots to play in, and Huanglangxi was a relatively good vacation spot in the surrounding area. However, since Qin Shi came back, he took the little girl to see 5 scenic spots. In addition, she lived in Hohai for a long time, so naturally, she had a certain immunity to this kind of retro old street and didn't have the slightest interest. Therefore, after wandering around aimlessly for a while, she clamored to find another place to play. Qin Shi had no choice but to drive her around. It wasn't until Qin Ruing found out that there was a marine park nearby that the little girl's big eyes finally lit up again. The scale of this marine park wasn't large, but the little girl had never been to a place like this before. After all, there was no harm without comparison. This also made her very happy. Along the way, she pointed at the fish in the water tank and asked questions. Why is this fish so big? Why does this fish have feet? Why is this fish glowing? Her understanding of marine life was still limited. As long as it lived in the water, it was a fish. This trip was quite pleasant. Before leaving, Qin Shi bought the little girl a dolphin pillow, which made her smile from ear to ear. Out of the aquarium, there was a shopping mall not far away. When the little girl held Qin Ruing's hand and waited outside for Qin Shi to drive out, she suddenly noticed the shared bicycle next to them. Shared bicycle, she still didn't know how to ride a bicycle. Hohai's streets were small, so it was rare to see shared bicycles riding here. Now that she suddenly saw so many shared bicycles, it immediately made the little girl envious. "Mama, I want to ride this." Looking at everyone riding the shared bicycle, the little girl pouted on the spot and acted coquettishly. Seeing this, Qin Ruing said to her with an awkward face, "No, you're still young. You can't ride this." This is not for children to ride. I want to ride this. I want to ride this. Seeing that Qin Ruing didn't agree, the little girl immediately withdrew her hands and ran to one of the bicycles. After Qin she drove the car out of the parking lot, the mother and daughter were still whispering, discussing next to the shared bicycle. Chapter 265. Chen Shi drove the car out of the parking lot. Just as he turned the corner, he saw the mother and daughter who were discussing. The wife was dignified, elegant, and charming. The daughter was innocent, lively, and cute. For a father, this scene might be the most beautiful scene in the world. Qin Ruing didn't notice that Chen Shi had already driven the car out. She was still trying to persuade the little guy to give up riding the bicycle. However, the little guy was now completely carried away. He didn't listen to his mother's words as usual. Seeing that his mother didn't help him, the little guy ran to find a small yellow bicycle and then stood aside thinking about how he should sit on it. The yellow bicycle was the shortest bike in the shared bicycle, but even if the saddle was the shortest, it wasn't something a 5-year-old child could play with. Looking at the pedestrians coming and going on the shared bicycle, the little guy directly sat on the horizontal tube in the middle of the yellow bicycle. Then he raised his hands and tightly grabbed the handles on both sides. In fact, it wasn't right to say that it was a horizontal tube, because the yellow bicycle was a low-span bicycle. This kind of shape was generally configured for women's bicycles, and women's bicycles naturally couldn't have a large horizontal bar like the old bicycle, so even a child of a few years old could easily ride it. Of course, the premise was that the child could ride a bicycle. After the little guy strained his legs over the horizontal tube, he sat on the horizontal tube and then used his 2 short legs to step on the ground and tried to move the bicycle. Not to mention that the bicycle wasn't unlocked. Even if the lock was unlocked, whether the little guy could hold on and not let the bicycle fall was a problem. So for a child, the shared bicycle really wasn't a toy, but was very likely to be a weapon. Seeing this, Qin Ruing could only sigh deeply, and then the expression on her face became serious for the first time. It seemed that he was going to flip out. She was also forced to have no choice. After all, in front of the child, one had to play the good cop, and the other had to play the bad cop, right? Chen Shi spoiled the little guy so much, so the annoying thing of playing the bad cop was not only done by her. Qin Ruing, who had always been dignified and elegant, was now going to flip out at the child on the street. Presumably, this was one of the compulsory lessons for the goddess after she became a married woman. However, just when Qin Ruing was about to flip out, a horn suddenly sounded from the street next to them. Qin Ruing looked back and saw that Chen Shi had already driven to their side. After seeing Qin Ruing's helpless expression, Chen Shi immediately understood what had just happened. So, he quickly rolled down the window, and then shouted at the little guy who was still trying to ride, "Nyen Nyen Nyen Nyen, do you want to go to heaven?" After hearing his father's call, the little thing immediately looked up at Chen Shi and grinned. "Papa! This is fun. I want to ride." As she spoke, she twisted the bell on the bike, but the more she twisted it, the more energetic she became. At this time, Aunt Zhang, who was sitting in the back, could not stand it anymore, so she said to Chen Shi, "Why aren't you going to carry her back? Look at how you've spoiled her." Chen Shi was inexplicably scolded, and he did not know whether to laugh or cry. Just when Chen Shi opened the door and got off, Aunt Zhang did not forget to remind him, "Be careful, don't let her fall." It could be seen that Grandma really had a sharp tongue but a soft heart for her granddaughter. After giving Qin Ruing a look, Chen Shi quietly went behind the little guy, and then, when she was not paying attention, he lifted her up by her armpits. If it was in the past, the little guy would be overjoyed to be ambushed by her father, but today she might be relying on this shared bike. Therefore, when she realized that she was being carried away by her father, the little guy burst into tears on the spot. Before Papa and Mama got angry, the little guy was the first to flip out. The sudden crying almost scared Chen Shi, so he quickly touched the back of her head and comforted her. "Woo, Nyen Nyen, don't cry, don't cry. You're so young, so you can't ride a shared bike. Papa will ride with you in the future, okay?" Hearing this, the little guy cried even louder. What should they do? The couple could not help but look at each other, and neither of them hardened their hearts to play the role of the good cop. At this time, it was natural for the elderly to step in. Aunt Zhang asked Qin to put the little guy in the back, then she quietly communicated with the little guy. Don't cry, if you cry again, I'll sell you to human traffickers. Nian Nian, look at you now, you're not likable anymore. Do you still remember what you told Grandma before? Isn't our Nian Nian the most obedient and sensible? Be good, you have to listen to Papa and Mama. If you make Papa and Mama angry again, be careful that they throw you away again. Then you can only live with Grandma in the future. What? You don't want to live with Grandma? Grandma is so sad, my granddaughter doesn't want me anymore. After all, she was a child that the elderly had personally raised. After a round of threats and temptations, Aunt Zhang managed to divert the little guy's attention to other places. The little guy did not even wipe his tears before he took the initiative to hug Aunt Zhang and said softly, I want Grandma. Grandma is the best. The older, the wiser. Actually, it was possible to scare the child, but one must not use it as a tactic. After scaring the child to make him realize that he was wrong, it was necessary to divert the child's attention in time and let them temporarily forget what was in front of them. Otherwise, it was very likely that overdoing it would be as bad as not doing enough. If it was more serious, it could even cause a certain degree of psychological trauma to the child. Aunt Zhang educated the little guy in a low voice, but her words were passed to the couple's ears without missing a word. The couple sat in the front row. At some point, Chen Shi's hand was no longer on the gear lever, but stretched out to the front passenger seat. The two silently felt the warmth from each other's palms. When the little guy's laughter sounded again, Qin Ruing smiled and patted Chen Shi's hand away, then pointed to the road ahead and said with a smile, drive carefully. Yes, ma'am. The car was quiet, so Qin Shi turned on the radio. Maybe it was set up by the previous tenant, so when it was turned on, it was the traffic radio channel. Pleasant music suddenly sounded in the car. This song could be considered a familiar Cantonese song. After listening to a sentence, Chen Shi could not help but hum along with the radio. The little guy seemed to have completely forgotten the previous unhappiness, so when she heard Chen Shi sing, she immediately laughed and clapped her hands. Papa sings well. It's so good. How good is it? It's better than him. Little mouth is so sweet. Come, give Papa a mouth. What are you doing? You're driving. Pay attention to the road. For a moment, the car was full of the family's laughter. Hard to leave, I want to hold on tight. The vast life is like the wilderness, like a child can lean on his father's shoulder who wants to get off the car. There are always some things that are hard to leave. Common sense is so inescapable. No matter how cold the world is. Thinking of this bicycle, there is still happiness to be borrowed. Chapter 266. In the blink of an eye, it was March 2nd. It was the 15th day of the first lunar month, the Lantern Festival. The little girl did not like to watch the gala performances on TV, so the family went out together after dinner. Where were they going? Of course, they were going to enjoy the lanterns. The Lantern Festival began more than 2,000 years ago in the Han Dynasty and had always been a major festival in Huaxia. According to the ancient customs, the new year was only truly over after the Lantern Festival. However, the pace of life was getting faster and faster. Even though the legal holiday stipulated that people would only go to work on the 7th day, many private enterprises still required people to start work on the 5th day. Among them, there were even more, such as the catering and entertainment industry. They might open for business on the eve of the new year, so the employees naturally could not rest. Such a pace of life directly led to the Lantern Festival almost following in the footsteps of the Dragon Boat Festival. With the decline of the Lantern Festival, the lively scene described by Xen Qiji in Green Jade Case, Yuan Shi, was naturally no longer as lively as before. The east wind blossoms 1,000 trees, blowing down the stars like rain. The fragrance of precious horses and carts fills the road, the sound of feng shao moves, the light of a pot turns, fish and dragons dance in the night. Moths flutter in the wind, ying and laughing in the wind. He searched for her thousands of times in the crowd, but when he looked back, she was at the fire. Today was Friday. Although the public institutions were on holiday, Most private enterprises still had to work tomorrow. In addition, everyone might be tired of playing during the new year, so the Wuho Temple Street was not as lively as it was during the Spring Festival. After leaving the house, the family took a taxi and went straight to the Panda Lantern Festival. The moon on the 15th was full and round, but what was more dazzling than the moon was the colorful Lantern Festival. Because they set off late, by the time Chen-Shi and the rest arrived at the Lantern Festival, it was already a 10-mile-long street with brilliant lights. As soon as they got out of the car, the fragrance of magnolia drifted to the tip of everyone's nose in the breeze. The little girl sniffed the fragrance in the air and turned her head to see the entrance of the Lantern Festival. There were a few panda lanterns outside the Lantern Festival. Although they were ugly and cute, they made her shout excitedly, "Papa, look! Panda! Panda!" In fact, to this little girl, there was not much difference between going to the Lantern Festival and going to the zoo. She was dazzled by the colorful lanterns in all kinds of shapes and sizes. She chattered excitedly all the way. In Chen-Shi's eyes, this Lantern Festival was somewhat similar to the Earth Temple Fair. Other than strolling around, there was only eating, drinking, and playing. However, what was worth praising was that the food in Chengdu was indeed much better than the food in Shangjing. The whole family ate and watched along the way. After admiring the lanterns, they watched the magic show. Finally, under the illumination of the fireworks, they sat in the car and went home with satisfaction. In the end, this trip to Chengdu was still very pleasant. The next morning, after breakfast, Chen-Shi pulled the little girl to his side and asked with a smile, "Ninian, Daddy has already bought the plane tickets. We'll fly back to Zhonghai later and visit our old home, okay?" "Alright." The little thing's eyes lit up at the mention of taking a plane. Seeing this, Chen-Shi struck while the iron was hot and said, "Then go and help your mother pack her things now. After she is done, we will set off." "Good. I'll go help Mama." Everything went smoothly. It wasn't until Chen-Shi changed the boarding pass and took her to say goodbye to Aunt Zhang that the little thing suddenly froze in place. After staring blankly for a long while, she suddenly came back to her senses. Was she going to say goodbye to her grandmother? She thought Aunt Zhang was going to go home with them. When Chen-Shi saw that the little girl's expression was a little strange, he immediately smiled and hugged her in his arms. He gently comforted her and said, "Ninian, we should get on the plane. Hurry and say goodbye to your grandmother. We'll come to Chengdu to see her again in the future." Perhaps it was because this period of time together had aroused her dependence on Aunt Zhang, so when the little girl came back to her senses, she immediately said very angrily, "No. I'm not going. I want to go with my grandmother." This expression of anger rarely appeared on the little girl's face, so when Chen-Shi saw her expression, he was quite surprised. The little girl was angry and twisted her body to get out of his arms. Seeing this, Chen-Shi immediately hugged her tightly and didn't let her run away. But this hug was serious. After realizing that her freedom of life was restricted by her father, the little thing flipped out on the spot. "I'm not going. I'm not going. I want to go with my grandmother. My grandmother wants to go with us." As she shouted, her voice started to sound like she was about to cry. Following that, she burst into tears. Well, things were getting out of hand. The reason why the couple didn't tell the little girl in advance was that they were afraid that she would cry. But what would come, and they couldn't avoid it even if they wanted to. The reason why they wanted to leave was actually because of the same reason. Aunt Zhang had her own family, and their family was always outsiders. Naturally, they couldn't stay at Aunt Zhang's house for a long time. After all good things must come to an end. There were people coming and going at the ticket gate, and the little girl's sudden crying attracted a lot of attention. Chen-Shi had no choice but to take the little girl to a rest chair and let Aunt Zhang comfort her. This kind of thing had happened many times. It was normal for children to be clingy. So, the family comforted the little girl one by one. Chen-Shi took out his phone and made a live video call with Aunt Zhang. He promised that he would bring her to Chengdu in the future, and only then did the little girl slowly stop crying. But she still didn't want to be separated from Aunt Zhang. She lay in her grandmother's arms without saying a word, as if she had been wronged. In the end, even the airport broadcast announced that they were boarding the plane. Only then did the little girl reluctantly wave goodbye to her grandmother with red eyes. "Grandmother, grandmother, we'll come to see you in the future." After watching the couple carrying the little girl gradually disappear into the distance, Aunt Zhang couldn't help but wipe the tears from the corners of her eyes. Although she wasn't her biological child, her love for Nian Nian was very real. The plane took off. Perhaps it was because she had just cried, but the little girl didn't even have the interest to look at the clouds outside. She fell into a deep sleep. When she woke up again, the family had already returned to Zhonghai. The moment the cabin door opened, a salty sea breeze unique to coastal cities blew in. Unlike Chengdu and Shangjing, Zhonghai gave Chenxi the most unique feeling. But that feeling didn't come from the city itself, but from the people standing next to him at this moment. Chenxi carried the little girl. The moment he walked out of the gangway, he couldn't help but hold Qin Ruoying's hand. "We're back." Chapter 267. As soon as the family got off the plane and walked into the terminal, it began to drizzle. Just a moment ago, the sky was clear, but now it suddenly became drizzling. And this sudden spring rain seemed to be a ceremony to welcome the return of their family. Perhaps it was because she had slept on the plane, so when the little guy got off the plane, his lively and energetic appearance came back. Therefore, the little thing did not ask Qin to hold her. Instead, she jumped and ran in the corridor with her short legs. Seeing her excited look, the couple quickly followed behind her, hand in hand. If they ignored the little girl in front of them, the two of them now looked like a couple who came to Zhonghai for their honeymoon. It was impossible to tell that they were an old couple with a 5-year-old child. The little girl ran and jumped. After running for a while, she made a sharp turn and directly lay in front of the floor-to-ceiling window of the terminal. Then, she looked at the planes in front of her and said excitedly, "Papa, look! That plane is running!" She came to the little girl's side. After touching her head with a smile, he put his hand on her back and pushed her out step by step. While walking, she asked with a smile, "See, didn't you just get on the plane? How do you feel?" The little thing seemed to like being pushed by her father, so she leaned back and did not fall down because of the support of Qinxi's palm. Then, she lay on Qinxi's palm. Then, under the push of Qinxi, like a master, she slowly walked forward with her short legs. "I like it. I like to fly." Looking at the bright smile on the little girl's face, Qinxi could not help but look at Qin Ruoying and smile. This child is so likable. The airport was so big that it took more than 10 minutes to walk out of the station. Even though there was a sidewalk elevator, the little thing was still tired of standing, so she turned around and raised her hands to Qinxi. Without needing her to say anything, Qinxi immediately squatted down and then hugged her in his arms. The higher one stood, the further one could see. Therefore, when she sat in Qinxi's arms, she pointed to exit 3 and asked in confusion, "Papa, what are they doing?" She looked in the direction the little fellow was pointing and saw 2 rows of burly men in black suits standing in front of the gate of the number 3 exit. That murderous aura was like that of a gang welcoming their boss home at the entrance of a prison. "He should be here to pick me up." "What's that?" "Let me give you an example. Let's say you take a plane to Chengdu alone. Grandma is afraid that you won't be able to find your way, so she comes to the airport to pick you up in advance. This is called picking you up." Oh, the little fellow nodded as if she understood. Then, she asked doubtfully, "Then who's coming to pick us up today?" "We don't need anyone to pick us up because we're going home now, not to Grandma's." Hearing this, the little fellow pouted and seemed to want to ask something, but Qinxi pinched her little face and decisively stopped this topic. Nowadays, stars like to pose for photos at the airport. As the fashion capital of Huaxia, there were stars coming to Zhonghai Airport to pose for photos every day. This also led to many fans waiting at the airport for a long time just to take a photo with their favorite stars. At least 20 or 30 men in suits stood at the number 3 exit. There was a murderous aura there, which naturally made ordinary people dare not approach. Therefore, even though the other exits were about to be lined up, the number 3 exit was still a scene of sparrows. This abnormal situation also attracted the attention of a large number of professional fans. Although they did not dare to approach, They still carefully surrounded the number 3 exit with their mobile phones, wanting to see which big shot was coming. Chen Shi's family was not people who liked to join in the fun, so after getting off the escalator, Chen Shi and Qin Ruoying directly turned a corner and walked to the number 4 exit in front of them. At this moment, a voice suddenly sounded from behind them. "Mr. Qin, you're back." Chen Shi looked back and saw Su Wei with an old face running toward him with great enthusiasm. "Mr. Su, what are you doing?" "Hey, I just got off the plane and saw you, so I wanted to come over and say hello. After all, you're my savior." "Oh, okay, I've said hello, you can go do your thing." After that, Chen Shi held the little fellow in one hand and Qin Ruoying in the other and prepared to leave. When Su Wei saw his posture, he suddenly became anxious, so he quickly ran to him and continued to say, "Mr. Chen, you see, this is fate. You haven't called a taxi yet, right? Why don't you let me give you a ride?" While speaking, Su Wei bowed to Chen Shi and made an inviting gesture. Chen Shi stopped, but he did not look at Su Wei. Instead, he turned his head and looked behind him. Ning Zhonghua was standing not far behind him. After going through thick and thin together, these two brothers had actually become sworn brothers? After Ning Zhonghua saw Chen Shi turn around, he immediately ran over, then smiled at Chen Shi and said, "Mr. Chen, long time no see." Chen Shi did not speak. Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei looked at each other quietly. Then Ning Zhonghua reluctantly continued to smile and said, "I came to pick up old Su, but I didn't expect to meet you here. If it's convenient, why don't we give you a ride? What do you think?" Chen Shi looked at the two of them calmly, then turned his head to look at Qin Ruoying. When he saw Qin Ruoying nod gently, Chen Shi replied, "Okay, let's go. I'll give you a ride today." "That's great. Mr. Chen, this way please." Su Wei jumped up excitedly on the spot. He stretched out his left hand and bowed slightly at the same time, like a greeter welcoming an important guest. He quickly walked in front to lead the way for Chen Shi. Wasn't the direction he was heading to exit 3? Su Wei led Chen Shi's family to exit 3. At this time, 2 rows of big men in suits immediately bent down and bowed to Chen Shi's family. At the same time, they shouted in unison, "Mr. Chen, hello." 20 to 30 big men in suits bowed in unison and shouted loudly. Almost instantly, they shocked the entire terminal and attracted the attention of the surrounding crowd. This scene, Chen Shi didn't need to think to know that Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei had found out through their friends that he was going to fly back to Zhonghai, so they deliberately arranged such a show. The crowd was excited. After all, this was even more grand than when a celebrity made an appearance. Countless professional fans took out their phones and were ready to take photos. However, after the big men in suits bowed, they turned around and looked at the surrounding crowd, then stepped forward to stop them from taking photos. Chen Shi frowned slightly, but he did not say anything. However, the little girl in his arms was excited. She was a child, so she always liked excitement. This kind of treatment really made her very excited, so she raised her small hand and waved to the surrounding crowd with a big laugh. Chapter 268. Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei were obviously treating them with the highest standards. Therefore, when Chen Shi and his family walked out of Terminal 3 with Su Wei, the little girl was immediately attracted by the yellow Bentley in front of her. "Papa, this car is so long." It was no wonder that she was surprised. After all, the common 3-compartment cars on the streets were generally about 4.3 meters long, but the Mulsanne Grand in front of her was different. The length of the limousine was 6.57 meters, which was 2 meters longer than the average car. It naturally gave people a very shocking feeling from the side. The luxury car was extraordinary, so its price was naturally not trivial. The price of 35 million yuan was as high as a mansion driving on the road. Su Wei bought this car to receive important guests. After buying it, he had only used it a few times. Today, when he learned that Chen Shi was going back to Zhonghai, he immediately took out this treasure to please him. Of course, the price of this car was secondary. Tens of millions was just a drizzle for a tycoon of this level. The most important thing was that this car was limited to only 12 in the world, and there was only one in the entire Huaxia. Even if you had money, you couldn't buy it. Naturally, the price would increase. In order to win Qinshi's favor, Su Wei used all of his tricks. He almost hung a banner at the entrance of the airport parking lot that said, "Welcome Mr. Qin to Zhonghai." Su Wei had completely transformed into a concierge now. He respectfully opened the door for Qinshi's family. After Qinshi's family got in the car, he wanted to get in as well. However, at this time, Qinshi, who was sitting in the car, glanced at him indifferently. Su Wei was very smart. He almost instantly understood what Qinshi meant, so he quickly found a way out of this situation. He smiled and said, "Mr. Chen, I won't disturb you, I'll sit in the back." After that, he gave Ning Zhonghua a look, and he ran to the Mercedes-Benz S-Class in the back. Because Ning Zhonghua and Qinshi knew each other earlier, compared to Su Wei, it was easier for Ning Zhonghua to talk to Qinshi. However, there was an old saying, "Today is different from the past." After the two of them experienced a series of events, their attitude toward Qinshi had naturally changed dramatically. It was a kind of respect from the bottom of their hearts, and it had nothing to do with age, experience, or social status. It was purely because Qinshi was better than them. This alone was enough. With Ning Zhonggua's personality, he obviously wouldn't do something like this. However, after Su's suggestions, he finally nodded and agreed. After all, if he didn't agree, what should he do to continue to get closer to Qin? Beauty and money? Did Qin need? Therefore, sometimes, it was very meaningful to put down one's face to flatter in front of the leader. As for those elegant people who thought they were virtuous and looked down on flattery, they actually fell into a misconception. They always thought that flatterers were incompetent people. In fact, flattery was a sign of high EQ, and it was also a common trait of successful people. After Su Wei left, Ning Zhonghua sat directly in the front passenger seat. In this luxury car, there was actually a partition between the front seat and the back seat. The back seat was completely a separate space, which was commonly known as the boss cabin. This was an extended version, and the back seat could sit 4 people, so it used a 4-seat design. Qinshi and Qin Ruing sat side by side, and the little girl climbed between the 2 seats opposite them. She seemed to be very interested in the layout of the car. From time to time, she would open and close the small table on the seat. She was having a lot of fun. At this time, Ning Zhonghua lowered the partition in the car, turned around and asked Qinshi with a smile, "Mr. Qin, do you want to go home first, or do you want to eat?" It was not even 1 o'clock in the afternoon, which was just the time for lunch. Su Wei and Ning Zhonghua spent so much effort just to treat Qinshi's family to a meal. Hearing this, Qinshi immediately turned his head and looked at Qin Ruing. It was all up to his wife. Seeing this, Qin Ruing first looked at the tall terminal through the window, then asked the little girl, "Ninian, are you hungry?" "I'm not hungry." The little girl was busy fiddling with the car refrigerator in the middle of the armrest, and she didn't even raise her head. After getting off the plane, she clamored for Qinshi to buy her KFC. After eating a hamburger, she was naturally not hungry at all. Looking at the little girl who was tossing and turning in the opposite seat, Qin Ruing thought for a moment, then suddenly smiled at Qinshi and said, "It's still early. How about we go back to school?" Back to school? Qinshi was stunned for a moment. He really didn't expect Qin Ruing to want to go here after returning to Zhonghai. But after thinking about it, Qinshi still understood Qin Ruing's idea. So, he smiled and said to Ning Zhonghua, "President Ning, to Zhonghai University, sorry to trouble you." Perhaps because he was in a good mood, Qinshi's pleasant appearance at the moment made Ning Zhonghua feel flattered. He quickly replied happily, "Okay, Mr. Chen, take a rest, we'll be there soon." Under the gray sky, a fleet of luxury cars drove from the airport to Zhonghai University. Because he didn't want to be too eye-catching, Qinshi asked the fleet to stop on the street some distance away from the school gate. Then, he held the little girl in one hand and Qin Ruing in the other, and the family of 3 slowly walked to the place that represented the beginning. Time flew by, and the years flew by. What a blissful year, fleeting past. Time did not leave any mark on the couple's faces. They were still young, except that they no longer had the innocence of their school days. Everything seemed to be the same as before. The little girl lay on Qinshi's shoulder and looked around. Her cute little appearance immediately attracted a lot of envious eyes. Ignoring the astonished gazes of the bystanders, the family of three leisurely walked on the forest path. That tree, that lake, that pavilion, that building, it seemed to be the same as it was 10 years ago. They wandered aimlessly around their alma mater. It was not until they came to the playground that she suddenly remembered the magnificent feat of covering the playground with roses. She would always remember that scene. In the sea of roses, Ring, dressed in white, was like a beautiful butterfly. Under everyone's astonished eyes, she flew directly into his arms. That should be the most glorious moment of his life, right? Perhaps sensing the sudden smile on Shi's face, Ring asked with a smile, "What's wrong? Did you think of something good?" Hearing this, Shi immediately squeezed her hand and asked with a smile, "Isn't it all because of you? Is it? Isn't it? Are you blaming me? How is that possible? I can't wait to do it again. That feeling, it's great. Look at how happy you are." The couple sat in the stands and showed their affection unscrupulously while the little guy jumped around them. A football game was being held on the playground. The little guy imitated the other spectators and shouted cheers from time to time. He looked very excited. After sitting for a while, she suddenly hugged Ring's slender waist, then looked into her eyes and asked with a little confusion, "Ying, actually I have a question to ask you." What's the question?" "Why did you like me in the first place?" After hearing what he said, Ring was stunned on the spot. She could not help but ask, "Why do you ask that?" Hearing this, she shook his head and sighed, "I don't think I'm good enough for you." Of course, this sentence was not referring to the current him, but to the past him. Therefore, she had always been very puzzled. What kind of luck did he have to be favored by the goddess? Could it be Ring really had the ability to predict the future? Did she know that he had potential? Of course, Ring did not have the ability to predict the future. Therefore, after hearing Shi's words, she could not help but smile. After reaching out and touching Shi's cheek, she said slightly mischievously, "Then you have to ask Yu Lao, why did he put my red string on your hand?" "Then I have to go to Yu Lao's temple and burn incense to repay the vow. I have to thank him for giving me such a good wife." Fate was a kind of fate. The reason why the two of them were together was perhaps because fate had arranged for them to be together. And she obviously had not reached the level of being able to see through fate. "You are as beautiful as a flower, and the years pass by like water." Answer: is leisurely and self-pity in the boudoir. Turn in front of the peony fence, close to the lake and the mountain rock. Loosen the collar button with you, the width of the shirt, the tips of the sleeves are ruffled, and the teeth are stained. Wait for you to endure and sleep tenderly for a while. It was that place where they had met before. Look at each other, it was difficult to say anything to each other. Chapter 269. March was rainy. In Zhonghai, a first-tier bustling city, one naturally could not feel the leisure of a small city in the south. The drizzling March seemed to have covered Zhonghai with a thin layer of gauze. The couple sat quietly in the stands of the sports field. In front of them was the football field brimming with youthful sweat, but behind them was the old building of the Republic of China. With such a profound background, it seemed to have covered their backs with a hint of loneliness and otherworldly charm. The hazy artistic conception of the misty Jiangnan could probably only be experienced in this beautiful campus. The little fellow could not feel the tranquil and distant artistic conception. Instead, she was completely attracted by the lively football game on the field. Although she did not even understand the rules of the football game, as long as the audience began to cheer, she would immediately jump up and cheer with everyone. At this time, someone shouted, "Enai Qian is here." This sentence was like a stone thrown into the lake, immediately splashing circles of ripples. After hearing this sentence, many of the audience immediately stood up and ran out of the sports field. The players on the field also heard the movement. This was not an official game, but a training game for the school's football team. Therefore, several of the team members stopped on the spot. After looking around, they did not even bother with the game and directly ran out of the sports field with the crowd. Seeing that the lively sports field suddenly became empty, the little fellow ran to Shi and asked doubtfully, Papa, why did they leave? Looking at the little fellow's unsatisfied look, Chen-shi immediately smiled and pulled her into his arms. Then he fooled her. They are students, of course, they are going to class. Nian, do you still remember what teacher Wang taught you before? What should you do after hearing the bell? She had been to kindergarten before and naturally knew the rules of the kindergarten, so she immediately laughed and replied, I remember. I want to go to the classroom. Smart. You see, your brothers and sisters have all gone to class. Do you want to go to class? Hearing this, the little fellow immediately tilted her head and pondered. After all, there were so many children in the kindergarten. In addition to teaching them singing and drawing, the teachers would also organize them to play games together. In fact, it was quite fun. But if she went to kindergarten, she wouldn't be able to stay by her parents' side all day. Therefore, after serious consideration, the little thing shook its head and said with obvious hesitation, I don't want to go. When Chen-shi saw her reaction, he immediately knew what was going on. Looking at this situation, if he were to guide her a little after returning to Shangjing, this child would probably still be willing to go to kindergarten. Because many students had left, the field had become much quieter. Without any excitement to watch, this little thing obviously couldn't sit still. Therefore, Chen-shi picked up the little fellow and held Qin Ruoying's hand as they wandered around the school again. There were 3 campuses in Zhonghai University. They were currently at the headquarters, which was the old campus. However, even though the old campus was located in the city, it covered a large area. It was more than 3,000 mu, which was more than 2 million square meters. Therefore, it would take at least 1 or 2 hours for the couple to explore the entire Zhonghai University. Anyway, it was still early, and they had nothing to do, so they casually strolled around the campus. They didn't take the main road, but chose a small path in the forest. The rain was so light that they didn't even need to use an umbrella, but it was long-lasting. A few drops would fall from time to time, so it still wet the stone path along the way. Walking on such a path, in a trance, the deep and distant mood came back. He still remembered that 10 years ago, they also walked side by side on this path. Even if there were no words along the way, it didn't prevent them from knocking on each other's hearts. Just like the moral scriptures said, the big voice is silent, the elephant is invisible, and great love is speechless. The family of 3 strolled slowly along the path. After passing through the forest path and walking around the lake, they arrived at the teaching building area. The school was supposed to be a quiet place, but now it was very lively. They didn't know what happened, but many students crowded in the open space outside the teaching building, blocking the surrounding roads. This lively scene naturally attracted the little fellow's attention. Papa, what are they looking at? I want to see it too. Under the little fellow's constant shouting, Chen-shi had to lift her up high, and then tried to squeeze in the direction of the crowd. Although most of the vision was blocked by the wall of people, Chen-shi listened for a while and understood what was going on here. It turned out that there was a film crew here. These days, filming was not a rare thing. The main reason why there was such a big commotion was mainly because of the female lead of this film. The female lead was called Enchanting, and she was a popular female star recently. Her popularity was already very high, and she graduated from Zhonghai University, so it was a home field for her. Naturally, the junior brothers and sisters came to support her, which was why there was such a big commotion. Papa, they're shooting a movie. Shooting a movie. The little fellow also heard the discussion around her. When the 3 words, shooting a movie, drilled into her ears, the little fellow suddenly sat on Chen-shi's shoulder as if she had been injected with stimulants. I want to see a movie. Papa, go over a little. I can't see. I can't see. Although there were many people around, the discussion was not very loud. After all, everyone knew that the sound of the scene was recorded in a movie, so when they spoke, they deliberately lowered their voices. After the little guy made such a ruckus at the top of his voice, it immediately attracted the attention of many people. The students standing in front turned around to look at the little fellow, and then they all moved to the sides, making a path for them in the impenetrable crowd. Respecting the old and loving the young was a traditional Chinese virtue, which was most easily reflected in the hot-blooded college students. Thank you. Chen Shi squeezed through the passageway with the little girl in her arms and thanked the students along the way. At this time, Qin Ruing whispered a few words to the little fellow. It was not right to shout like this in public. It was very rude, and it showed that she had no family education. The little fellow was very sensible. So after listening to her mother's words, she seemed to understand that her behavior just now was a little rude, so she copied Chen Shi and kept thanking the students on both sides. Thank you, brother. Thank you, sister. I'm sorry. After saying that, the little fellow was a little embarrassed and stuck out her little tongue. That cute little look made a female student next to her couldn't help but praise. Sister, your daughter is so cute. Thank you. Qin Ruing smiled and nodded. After reaching out and pinching the little fellow's little face, she followed Chen Shi to the front of the crowd. When they came to the front row, they finally saw the appearance of the big star. She was really beautiful. Probably because they were shooting a youth campus drama, the female lead was dressed as a student and looked very pure. With the help of the makeup artist, she looked about the same age as the surrounding students. She was completely a young girl in her early 20s. However, when Chen Shi saw the appearance of the female star, he immediately couldn't help shaking his head and laughing. Chapter 270. Enai Qinyu had changed her name to Enai Qianqian. Last year, due to the broadcast of a phenomenal web drama, she became popular all over the internet. Coupled with the company's support and various resources, she was successfully sent to several of the most popular variety shows. She established a youthful and lovely persona in front of the audience and attracted a large number of fans. Because of this, Enai Qianqian became one of the most popular young actresses and successfully entered the ranks of A-list actresses. Times were developing faster and faster, and so was the entertainment industry. Just like what Andy Zai sang in 17: I shamelessly participated in the challenge when I was 17. Even stars have training classes, it's so refreshing in just 1 year. Andy Zai joined the wireless training class in 1981 and started as a film and television actor. Under the guidance of brother Fa, he started as an extra and entered the music industry in 1986. It wasn't until the early 1990s that he finally gained a place in the music industry with the song, If You Were My Legend. After that, in addition to creating a series of iconic characters on the screen, he also released a number of hit singles such as Thank You for Your Love, Wang Qin Shui, and other classic love songs. Finally, he was promoted to the throne of the 4 heavenly kings by the Hong Kong media. At this time, Andy Zai had been in the music industry for more than a decade. Almost all of the stars in that era were versatile artists who could act and sing. Many of them were even radio hosts. But now, from the 18th tier to the A-list, it might only take one movie or TV series. Some of them didn't even know how to act. They only needed to be good-looking and participate in a few variety shows to become popular all over the country. This also created a strange phenomenon. Nowadays, stars become popular quickly, but they also become popular very quickly. A few years ago, the little fresh meat that was in the headlines almost every day was forgotten in just 2 or 3 years. Enai Qianqian knew the cruelty of the entertainment industry. Since she finally became popular, she naturally wanted to seize this opportunity. Therefore, she tried her best to maintain her popularity. Therefore, she suggested to the director that the shooting location be her alma mater. She also wanted to use this opportunity to make another wave of headlines. No matter what, Zhonghai University was still one of the top 10 universities in the country. Enai Qianqian's academic qualifications allowed her to beat the other illiterates in the entertainment industry, earning her the title of Goddess of Academic Qualifications. The reason why Chen Shi was able to call out Enai Qianqian's real name was because this little girl who appeared to be in her early 20s was actually an old auntie from the same batch as them. For an idol artist who relied on her looks and personality to attract fans, age was obviously a scary thing. After all, Qin Ring, who was the same age as her, was already a mother of a 5-year-old child. On the other hand, Enai Qianqian still had to play the role of a pure and lovely girl in front of the public. This kind of situation where his appearance did not match his actual age was really suspicious. Would she show symptoms of schizophrenia? Because of the little girl's protective talisman, the students forcibly made room for the family of 3 in the front row. After hearing Qinxi's words, Qin Ruoying immediately looked in the direction that Qinxi was pointing at. It's really her, and Qin. She's a big star now? And Qianqian and Qin Ruoying were students of the same major, so they usually saw each other frequently. Although their relationship was not considered close, after so many years after graduation, suddenly meeting an old classmate of hers naturally gave people a sense of closeness. And Qianqian had only entered the entertainment industry after graduating from university. She could be considered to be one of those talented people. After acting in a web drama, her acting skills had improved rapidly. Now that she was acting in a movie, no one could find any fault with her. This scene was very simple. It was a scene where the male and female lead reunited in university. After all, it was just a youth school movie, so the requirements for acting skills were not high. As long as the performance was natural, it was fine. Therefore, after 2 takes, the director shouted through the loudspeaker, "Cut! Very good, this scene is done. Young Master Ting, change your clothes and prepare for the next scene. Qianqian, you finished filming today. Go back and have a good rest. We'll continue tomorrow." "Okay, director." After hearing the director's words, Qianqian smiled politely. Seeing that the crew was busy rearranging the set, someone hiding in the crowd suddenly shouted, "Qianqian, I love you." This sentence instantly ignited the enthusiasm of the surrounding students. Everyone chimed in one after another. "Senior, you're so beautiful. I love you. Senior, give me an autograph. Senior Qianqian, I want to give birth to your children." Looking at the lively scene, if it were not for the staff stopping them, this group of enthusiastic students would have rushed up to Qianqian to ask for an autograph. "Thank you, everyone. Thank you, my cute junior brothers and sisters." Seeing that everyone was so enthusiastic, Qianqian turned around and bowed to the surrounding crowd. When she bowed for the 3rd time, Qianqian finally found a familiar figure in the crowd. Then, Qianqian was stunned. With Qinxi's eyesight, he immediately noticed the strange look that flashed across Qianqian's eyes. However, he thought that Qianqian was just surprised to see an old classmate, so he did not take it to heart. Qianqian was indeed an actress. After the surprise flashed across her face, she immediately put on a warm smile and walked toward the direction of the family of 3. The surrounding students thought that she was coming over to give an autograph, so they instantly became excited. "Senior, I have a pen. Give me an autograph. Please give me an autograph. Senior, I love you." Qianqian kept waving at the surrounding students, but she did not have any intention of giving them an autograph. After arriving in front of Qin Ruoying, Qianqian lifted the cordon set by the crew and smiled at Qin Ruoying. "Long time no see." Qin Ruoying did not expect Qianqian to recognize her as an old classmate, so she was stunned for a moment before she replied with a smile, "Long time no see." As the crowd was too excited, after a simple greeting, Qianqian gestured for Qinxi's family to follow her in. Seeing this, the couple could not help but look at each other. Qianqian then led them through the cordon and followed her to the temporary resting area set up by the crew. There were originally a few crew members resting in the resting area, but when they saw Qianqian coming over, they very consciously retreated. After inviting Qinxi's family to take a seat, Qianqian then looked at the little girl in Qinxi's arms and asked, "Is this your daughter? How old is she?" "Almost 5 years old." Qin Ruoying replied politely, then turned to the little girl and said, "Nin, greet auntie." Hearing this, the little girl immediately greeted Qianqian sweetly, "Auntie." "Good girl." After a few simple pleasantries, the 2 of them fell silent. They did not seem to know what to talk about with each other. After all, the 2 of them were not very close when they were in university. They could not even be considered friends. They were probably classmates who would greet each other when they met on the road. The reason why Qin Ruoying felt that Qianqian was very close to her was because they had been classmates for a long time. Qinxi and Qin Ruoying were originally not in the same major, so naturally he and Qianqian were even more distant. Therefore, Chen Shi simply sat beside the little girl and played with her, leaving the space for them to catch up. And Ai Qian was silent for a while. Then, as if she thought of something, she suddenly smiled and said, Do you mind if I call you that? I don't mind. Do you know? When I first saw you, a very popular online song suddenly popped up in my head. What song? School Bell. Then, Ai Qian softly hummed the song. They all say she is a flower, flowers are not as good as her. They all say she is a dream, how many people have pursued her? The heartless years like water, slowly painted in the books. Ask the fleeting clouds, how is our school bell? Who plays the guitar and wants to be the school bell, who will be the school bell? So love is like a blackboard eraser. Chapter 271. Ai Qian simply hummed a few words. Her voice was very pleasant and it seemed like she had learned to sing before. Therefore, such a seemingly vulgar online song had a different flavor under her interpretation. Looking at Qin Ruoying's puzzled expression, Ai Qian suddenly smiled and said, Ying, 10 years have passed and you're even prettier than before. You're indeed worthy of being the campus belle of our batch. Qin Ruoying smiled and shook her head when she heard that. She turned to look at the little girl in Chen Shi's arms and replied, I can't afford to be called that. You, on the other hand, are now a big star and the juniors outside are all your fans. Ai Qian looked at the crowd outside the resting area and a faint smile flashed across her face. Ever since she became popular, the feeling of being the center of attention had always lingered around her. From the initial discomfort to the current calmness, Ai Qian had a very rich psychological experience. She was now like a goddess standing on the clouds. This gave Ai Qian a lot of confidence. For example, when she faced the goddess in front of her who once made her feel ashamed, Ai Qian could not help but feel pity for her. With Qin Ruoying's beauty, Ai Qian would not be surprised if she became the second sister milk tea. However, she still married the poor guy that everyone looked down on and even gave birth to a daughter for him. Although their family seemed to be very happy now, such an ordinary life was definitely not what Ai Qian wanted. What a pity. Ai Qian felt pity for Qin Ruoying because she had been in the entertainment industry for many years and had a pair of discerning eyes. Just like Tang Wei's character in When Beijing Meets Seattle 2, Ai Qian could easily determine the total value of Qin Ruoying's clothes with just a casual glance. Qin Ruoying didn't wear any jewelry or watches. Although the simple gray coat looked like it was custom-made, it still couldn't hide the rough workmanship of the coat itself. A conservative estimate was that she was only worth 500 yuan from head to toe. Looking at Chen Shi and the little girl, they were also dressed in cheap clothes. If a man was really capable, he would obviously not mistreat his wife and daughter. Therefore, Ai Qian came to a conclusion. The family of 3 in front of her was not very rich and might even be a little short of money. As the saying went, a woman should be raised well. Although Qin Ruoying still looked glamorous now, what would happen in a few years? Women needed maintenance and maintenance needed money. Perhaps she would only truly understand these principles when she grew old and exhausted the beauty bestowed upon her by the heavens. In order to avoid looking down on others, Ai Qian also asked about Chen Shi and Qin Ruoying's current work situation during the chat. When she found out that the husband and wife were running a tea house together, her guess was immediately confirmed. This caused Ai Qian to feel bored to death. After all, they were not from the same world. No matter how outstanding they were when they were students, once they chose the wrong path after graduation, wouldn't the end result be to become ordinary? Ai Qian was a popular actress. Even if she found out about Qin Ruoying's background during the conversation, her face did not show a trace of contempt. After the two chatted for a while, Ai Qian apologetically mentioned that she had to rush to a job later. Seeing this, Qin Ruoying immediately nodded to express her understanding. Then, the reunion ended in a happy atmosphere. Before leaving, Ai Qian took the initiative to add Qin Ruoying's WeChat and warmly said that they could keep in touch in the future. The reason why she did this was because she felt that Qin Ruoying still had room to recover. People would always grow up. Under her influence, Perhaps Qin Ruoying would suddenly come around one day. With Qin Ruoying's beauty, figure, and unique temperament, as long as she nodded, Enai Qianqian could definitely introduce her to an ideal family. Maybe they could even be good sisters in the future? Enai Qianqian smiled as she sent Qin Shi's family out of the cordon. After waving goodbye to them, she turned around and walked to the set. From the beginning to the end, she did not put on any airs in front of the family of three. The couple walked out of the crowd under the envious eyes of the fans. After walking for a while, Qin Ruoying suddenly asked thoughtfully, what do you think of Enai Qianqian? Hearing this, Chen Shi smiled and replied, he's an adult. What do you mean? Isn't there a popular saying now? Peppa Pig gets a tattoo and applause for society. Enai Qianqian is a standard society person. I don't quite understand what you mean. When Chen Shi saw Qin Ruoying's confused face, he could not help but reach out and hug her slender waist. He smiled and said, if you don't understand, then don't think too much. Let's go, we don't belong to the same world. The couple continued to stroll around the campus. It wasn't until the little girl was a little bored and wanted to go home to watch cartoons that they walked back in the direction of the school gate. Just as they were about to walk out of the school gate, a Toyota Alpha, commonly known as a celebrity nanny van, drove past them discreetly. When the assistant sitting in the passenger seat saw Chen Shi's family, she could not help but turn around and remind Enai Qianqian, Qianqian, your old classmates are still there. Should we give them a ride? Enai Qianqian was sitting in the back with a face mask on. When she heard the assistant's words, she turned her head sideways and glanced out the window. Then, she said indifferently, no need, let's just go. She had already cast the bait. As for whether the fish would take the bait or not, it was up to the fish. Enai Qianqian was half lying on the seat confidently. She even began to look forward to the moment when Qin Ruoying would chat with her on WeChat. However, when Enai Qianqian was resting with her face mask on, the assistant's voice sounded again. Sister Qianqian, look, that person seems to be CEO Su from Weisheng Pharmaceutical. Hey, the one next to him should be CEO Ning from China Ocean Corporation, right? Why are they here? As a celebrity assistant, there were actually a lot of things to learn. For example, she had to at least know some business moguls. What were business moguls to celebrities? They were scripts. They were resources. They were everything. To sum it up in two simple and crude words, that was sugar daddy. As long as the sugar daddy was strong enough, even an internet celebrity could be smashed by a rich businessman. Therefore, how to curry favor with the rich had become a compulsory course for celebrities. Of course, this did not mean that she had to sleep with them. Businessmen were after profits. A movie was worth hundreds of millions of investment. Did she really think that she could become the female lead just by sleeping with the financier? How could it be that simple? Businessmen would definitely not do a losing business. It was not easy to get a rich businessman to invest in her new movie. It was obviously a very effective way to make her presence known in front of a rich businessman. Therefore, Enai Qianqian immediately sat up from the chair. After making sure that she was not mistaken, she pulled off the mask on her face and quickly shouted to her assistant, "Where's my bag? Quick, quick, let me touch up my makeup." The minivan was parked in a parking space not far from the school gate. Then, Enai Qianqian started to touch up her makeup in the car. But just as she was in a hurry, something happened that left her flabbergasted. The two top business moguls in Zhonghai were like concierge at this moment. They quickly ran to Chen Shi's family, bowed and asked for instructions, and escorted Chen Shi's family to the Bentley Grand limousine. At this moment, Enai Qianqian was completely stunned. An indescribable feeling suddenly surged from her heart, and immediately, her face became rosy like a ripe rose. And this feeling of blushing, she had not experienced this for many years. The assistant saw that Enai Qianqian was still in a daze, so she could not help but remind her, "Sister Qianqian, they seem to be leaving." Hearing this, Enai Qianqian suddenly trembled as if she had been electrocuted. Chapter 272. Chen Shi and his family did not know what kind of psychological changes Enai Qianqian had gone through in the past 2 hours. At the same time, What Ni Chanxian did not know was that when Qinshi pointed out that she and Qin Ruoying were not from the same world, Qin Ruoying nodded thoughtfully. Then she took out her phone and deleted Ni Chanxian's WeChat friend list. Therefore, Ni Chanxian might not be able to wait for Qin Ruoying to take the initiative to send her a WeChat message. The reason was simple. Although they were old classmates, after so many years of polishing, their worldview, outlook on life, and values were clearly not on the same line. In other words, they did not have the same values, so of course, they would not be able to pee into the same pot. Qin Ruoying had a cold personality. In her opinion, since she and Ni Chanxian did not have the same topics, there was no need for them to contact each other. Because of this, her total number of WeChat friends was the same as Qin Shi's. She only had 3 contacts: Chen Shi, Aunt Zhang, and Qin Wanqin. In fact, if it were not for the frequent video calls with Aunt Zhang, Qin Ruoying would not have downloaded WeChat. The family of 3 got into Su Wei's luxury car. Then, they slowly left Zhonghai University under the envious gazes of the students. After the car drove for a while, Ning Zhonghua looked down at the time. 4:50 p.m., it was almost time to prepare dinner. Therefore, he rolled down the partition in the car and asked the little girl with a pleasant expression, "Nian, are you hungry? What do you want to eat later? There's all kinds of good food in Zhonghai. Uncle will take you to eat the best food today, okay?" Perhaps it was because they had just discussed the strategy, but Ning Zhonghua now focused all his attention on the little girl. He finally understood what was going on. In this family of 3, Qin Shi did not have the final say, and Qin Ruoying did not have the final say. The one who had the final say was the little girl in front of him who was tossing and turning in her seat. After hearing Ning Zhonggua's words, the little thing pouted and began to think. She wasn't hungry yet, but she still wanted to eat something. Therefore, after touching her little belly, the little girl said proudly, "My papa's cooking is the best. I like to eat papa's food. Today, I'll treat your family to a meal outside. How about we go to a restaurant? Eat outside? What are we eating? I see that you like it. Nian, what is your favorite dish?" When it came to eating, the little thing immediately became excited. Therefore, she immediately replied excitedly, "I like braised lion's head, and sweet and sour pork ribs, and prawns. Papa's prawns are delicious. Then Uncle will take you to eat the most authentic local dishes in Zhonghai, okay? All right." Although this little thing didn't even know what the local dishes were, she still nodded quickly like a chicken pecking rice. Seeing that the little girl agreed, Ning Zhonghua looked at the couple behind him and said with a smile, "Mr. Chen, Mrs. Chen, I wonder if this local dish is to your liking?" Hearing this, Qin Shi was not polite at all. After nodding with a smile, he replied, "We are not picky about food. You can arrange it as you see fit." He was not a reclusive master. Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei had flattered him like this. If he did not give them face, it would indeed be a bit too unreasonable. "That's great. I happen to know a local chef. His braised lion's head in brown sauce was the champion of a cooking competition. I think this child will definitely like it." Then, the luxury motorcade headed by Bentley and Mercedes-Benz S-Class drove to Dianjiang Avenue. After arriving at the destination, Chen Shi found that Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei had already arranged everything. Tonight's dinner was not at a restaurant, but on a yacht. "Papa, look, so many boats." After the little girl came to the dock, she pointed at the yachts outside the dock and shouted excitedly. Although she had been on a luxury cruise ship, she still couldn't figure out the difference between a big ship and a small ship, so she could only use a small ship to call a yacht. What was a yacht? Its positioning was not a means of transportation, but a high-end durable consumer product for water supply and entertainment. What did Ning Zhonghua do? He was the former chairman of the Ocean Voyage Group and the largest shareholder of the Ocean Voyage Group. The cruise ship that Fang Lei used when she got married was rented from the Ocean Voyage Group. Therefore, the large luxury business boat docked at the dock was obviously the place Ning Zhonghua had arranged for this dinner. It could be seen that in order to flatter this person, he and Su Wei had racked their brains. The reason why they chose to eat on the yacht was actually very particular. Once the yacht left the dock, it would become an absolutely enclosed space. In this environment, it was naturally easier to close the distance between people. Don't you see how many secret transactions that can't see the light of day were negotiated on the yacht? For Ning Zhongguo's painstaking arrangement, the couple didn't have much reaction, but the little girl was excited. After all, compared to the cruise ship, the boat in front of her made her feel the charm of the sea more. So, after boarding the boat, she jumped up and down excitedly in the boat. The yacht itself was synonymous with high quality, and the decoration in the cabin was naturally extremely exquisite and luxurious. The couple went straight to the top of the yacht under the leadership of Su Wei and Ning Zhongguo. When Chen Shi stood on the open-air observatory on the top floor, he couldn't help but nod with satisfaction, expressing his satisfaction with Ning Zhongguo and Su Wei's careful arrangement. At this moment, the sun hadn't set yet, and the sunlight after the rain was particularly clear, sprinkling on the sea as if it was going to dye the blue sea golden. Looking around, the high-rise buildings on both sides rose and fell one after another along the Dian River, looking particularly magnificent. Coupled with the sea breeze that constantly blew against his face, the scene at this moment was truly intoxicating. Even in the 21st century, it could still make people feel emotional. It could be said that the distant mountains were like black, and the nearby water was like smoke. Of course, this mountain was not a real mountain. It was a majestic skyscraper. The yacht set off from the ferry and sailed along the Dian River all the way to the East China Sea. Because there was still some time before dinner, the little girl ran to the deck and couldn't help but shout, "Papa! I like it here! I like it here!" Looking at her happy and excited appearance, Chen Shi couldn't help but smile. Chapter 273. As the saying goes, one who is unaccountably solicitous is hiding evil intentions. Ning Zhongguo and Su Wei spent so much effort to come up with so many tricks. Obviously, they didn't just want to make their presence known in front of Chen Shi. And this kind of flattery, for these two business moguls who were over 100 years old, was really a different experience. After all, with their status, even the mayor of Zhonghai had to give them some face. When money and power were no longer life goals, then health and longevity were obviously their last pursuit. Therefore, Chen Shi didn't even need to think to know what the two of them wanted from her. Seeing that the little guy was so happy today, Chen Shi gave them a chance to speak. The moment Chen Shi's voice fell, even with Ning Zhongguo's shrewdness, he still couldn't help but have a flash of joy on his face. Even Ning Zhongguo lost his composure, not to mention Su Wei. Overjoyed, Su Wei's face immediately showed a harmless smile. That smile also made him look like a farmer on the ridge of the fields. Where was his usual decisiveness and decisiveness of a CEO? The two quietly looked at each other. Then, Ning Zhongguo coughed twice and put on a slightly awkward expression as he said to Chen Shi, "Mr. Chen, actually, it's like this. You know, life is not like before. Alcohol, women, avarice, and anger are the most hurtful. When a person's body is weak, it is easy to get all kinds of diseases. Only when you get sick will you realize the importance of health." Sure enough, it was for the energy pill. Chen Shi leaned on the railing and looked at Ning Zhongguo quietly. Under his gaze, Ning Zhongguo seemed to be under a huge pressure. In just a short while, beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. He was like a primary school student who made a mistake. His voice became smaller and smaller. In the end, Ning Zhongguo couldn't help but lower his head. He didn't dare to look at Chen Shi again. "Ever since the incident last time, the two of us have been following your orders and not revealing any information about you. We told the public that the expert who made the Yama's sorrow had passed away. But what we didn't expect was that the rumor would become more and more ridiculous as it spread. Now, as long as someone has a difficult illness, they will come to us for help. We don't know how many people we have offended because of this." While Ning Zhongguo was explaining his difficulties in a low voice, the little fellow on the second deck suddenly raised her small head and shouted at Chen Shi, who was standing on the third deck, "Papa! There is a sofa here. Come and sit down." As she spoke, she excitedly patted the deck sofa beside her. The sofa was soft, even more comfortable than lying on a bed. Coupled with the afterglow of the setting sun and the gentle caress of the sea breeze, this young fellow had learned to enjoy the beauty of nature. "Okay, Dad will come down to accompany you." Chen Shi turned around and replied to the little fellow. Seeing this, Ning Zhonghua immediately swallowed back his unfinished words, and then stood aside solemnly without saying a word. Chen Shi glanced at him, but didn't say a word. She walked straight to the spiral staircase on the side. Seeing this, Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei couldn't help but have a very complicated expression on their faces. It's over, both of them knew their limits. Seeing that Chen Shi didn't say anything, they naturally wouldn't ask for trouble on this topic. Then, dinner began in a happy atmosphere. The yacht meandered along the Dian River. The little fellow chewed on the ribs and looked at the beautiful scenery brought by the lights on both sides of the river. She couldn't help but murmur, "Papa, it's so beautiful outside. Do you like it?" "I like it." "Then Uncle will treat you to a big meal and take you to see such beautiful scenery. Shouldn't you thank Uncle properly?" Hearing this, the little fellow immediately wiped the oil stains on her mouth with her hand, and then smiled sweetly at Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei. "Thank you, Uncle Ning." "Thank you, Uncle Su." "Hee hee, Nyan, if you like, you can come and play with Uncle at any time. Uncle will take you to have a good time in Zhonghai, how about it?" "Okay. Thank you, Thu." This child is really likable. Mr. Chin is so lucky. After dinner, Ning Zhonghua and Su Wei sent Qin Shi's family back to the Kangju community. As for the elixir, the two of them didn't dare to mention it again. After the little fellow politely said goodbye to the two uncles, the family of three turned around and walked to the Kangju community. When they brought the little girl to the entrance of the neighborhood, the couple stopped in their tracks at the same time. At this moment, the two of them couldn't help but have mixed feelings in their hearts. After all, this was the home that the two of them built together. Although this home was simple, it carried too many things: the sky, the breeze, the air, the temperature, the fragrance at that time, that feeling, the memories that were stagnant like film, you and me at that time. When the breeze blew, those things that couldn't be taken away were all called the past. Under the dim yellow light, the couple's shadows were very long. Perhaps because of the emotions in her heart, Qin Ruing couldn't help but have tears in her eyes. And just as the couple looked at each other in silence and reminisced about the past, a clear and crisp voice sounded very untimely. "Mama, let's go home. We're going home." As she spoke, the little fellow who spoiled the mood sat in Qin Shi's arms and reached out to Qin Ruing. She wanted to go into her mother's arms. After all, for this little fellow, her mother seemed to have left for a longer time. Qin Ruing quietly wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes, and then smiled as she took the little fellow from Chen Shi's arms. Accompanied by Nian Yan's somewhat disturbing shouts, they finally returned home. Perhaps it was the same feeling as Qin Shi felt when he first returned. When Qin Ruing walked into the room and saw the familiar furnishings in the house, she couldn't help but burst into tears like a broken dam. 5 years. It was indeed too long. After entering the room, the little fellow ran straight to the TV. After skillfully turning on the TV, she looked back at the door. When she saw her father and mother hugging each other excitedly, she immediately tilted her head and asked in confusion, "Papa, what's wrong with Mama?" Hearing this, Qin Ruing gently pushed Qin Shi away and wiped the tears on her face. Seeing that she was still adjusting her mood, Qin Shi turned back and said to the little fellow, "Sand got into Mama's eyes. Papa is blowing it for her." The little fellow nodded as if she understood, and then shouted to Qin Ruing, "Mama, watch cartoons with me." As she spoke, she patted the sofa beside her and motioned Qin Ruing to come and sit down. "Okay, we'll watch with you." Qin Ruing wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes, and then pulled Qin Shi to the little fellow's side. The family of three huddled together on the old sofa. Chapter 274. The next morning, after eating the breakfast made with love by Qin Shi, the little fellow lay on the sofa with a bulging belly and obediently recited a Tang poem. "Sleeping in spring, I hear birds singing everywhere. Wind and rain come at night, I wonder how many flowers fall." The little fellow recited very fluently, so after she finished reciting, she raised her little head and waited for her mother's praise with joy. However, what she didn't expect was that when Qin Ruing came to her side, she didn't praise her, but patted her lightly. This made the little fellow pout unhappily. Looking at her aggrieved little face, Qin Ruing smiled and pinched her little face, then patiently explained, Ninian, when you recite, you have to sit properly. Do you remember what mother taught you? You have to sit properly, and you have to stand properly. Have you forgotten it so quickly? Hearing this, the little fellow's head immediately drooped down. After shaking her head, she seemed to realize that she was wrong, so she burrowed into Qin Ruing's arms and said very coquettishly, I didn't forget. It's good that you didn't forget. Sit up, mother will recite the ancient poem with you, okay? Okay. After all, the child was still young, so she had to develop good living habits. Therefore, after teaching her to recite Quiet Night Thoughts and Climbing Yellow Crane Tower, Qin Ruing allowed the little fellow to watch cartoons. While the little fellow was watching cartoons, the husband and wife softly talked about the recent schedule. Gu Lao had already brought the twins back to Shangjing. Previously, he called Qinshi to ask when they would open the door. Although the house in the Kangju district was simple, it was built by the two of them, so Qin Ruing wanted to stay here for a few more days, which could also be considered as a kind of remembrance. But just as Qin Ruing was recalling the little sweetness in the past, she seemed to have thought of something and suddenly asked, Oh right, do you have Lin Xian's contact information? Yes, I'll find it for you. Qinshi took out his phone. After dialing Lin Xian's number, he handed the phone to Qin Ru. The call was quickly connected. Lin Xian's voice sounded from the other end of the phone. Qinshi? Her voice was very calm, as if there was no emotion at all. When Qin Ruing heard her voice, she did not speak immediately. Instead, she playfully pressed the speaker button and signaled for Qinshi to answer. Qinshi glanced at Qin Ruing, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Then he said to the phone, Ahem. Yes, it's me. Yingying is beside you, right? Get her to answer the phone. Huh. The couple looked at each other in surprise. Qin Ruing asked in confusion, Xian, how did you know I was there? Hearing this, Lin Xian on the other end of the phone immediately laughed out loud. Her laughter was very clear, like the tinkling of a bell. After laughing for a while, she suddenly pretended to be angry and said, You didn't tell me you were back for so long. Yingying, I'm telling you, you'll lose me if you do this. Didn't I call you as soon as I got back to Zhonghai? Don't give me that. I'm not listening. Xian, this is my fault. I apologize, don't be angry, okay? Although they had not contacted each other for many years, their relationship seemed to be better than before. Lin Xian was different from Ni Chanxian. She was one of Qin Ruing's few friends. Therefore, when Lin Xian pretended to be angry, Qin Ruing actually acted coquettishly on the phone. After a while, Lin Xian was giggling. Oh, okay, I forgive you. When Qinshi came back to find you, I helped a lot. You have to treat me to a good meal. Okay, when are you free? I'm free anytime. How about today? Both of you should be fine, right? Okay, what do you want to eat? The two of them discussed for a while on the phone. After confirming the time and place, they were ready to end the call. But just as Lin Xian was about to hang up, Qin Ruing suddenly asked, Oh, right, Xian, how did you know I'm back? Since Qinshi brought her home, the couple had been staying in Shangjing and did not contact anyone. So not only Qin Ruing, but even Qinshi was a little curious. How did Lin Xian know that Qin Ruing was back? After hearing Qin Ruing's question, Lin Xian did not immediately answer. Instead, she asked, Guess? Xian, stop keeping me in suspense. After the two of them joked around for a while, Lin Xian finally revealed the reason under Qin Ruing's relentless questioning. Hey, don't you know that you're already an internet celebrity? Internet celebrity? What's going on? Hearing this, Qin Ruing and Qinshi could not help but look at each other. They did not understand what she was up to. Although they hadn't met, Lin Xian could still imagine their dumbfounded expressions, so she couldn't help but laugh exaggeratedly on the other end of the phone. Xian, we're both confused by you. Okay, I won't tease you anymore. Let me ask you a question first. Did the two of you take photos at an internet celebrity children's playground in Shangjing? Internet celebrity children's playground? Qin Ruing still did not understand the situation, but Chen Shi suddenly came back to his senses. Previously, they took the little girl and the twin brothers on a trip to In-Kids with any friends. They wanted the little girl to experience a high-end children's playground. At that time, when they were sitting next to Nian Yan and playing with her, there was a girl from the photography department at Peking University who wanted to take photos of them. In the end, she even said that she wanted to use their photos for a competition. The photo of the two of you was used to participate in the International Photography Awards. And it even won first place in the professional portrait category. It seems to be on tour around the world now. After hearing what Lin Xian said, Chen Shi almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Wasn't this too ridiculous? At that time, he did not want to dampen the girl's passion for photography, and Qin Ruing did not mind, so he nodded and agreed. However, what Chen Shi did not expect was that this girl was so amazing. She actually used this photo to win a world-class award? It was no wonder that Lin Xian said that the two of them were now internet celebrities. Was this not considered internet celebrities? They were already F***king famous overseas. This sudden situation made the couple not know whether to laugh or cry. Lin Xian probably guessed how the two of them were feeling, so after laughing for a while, she quickly hung up the phone. After hearing the beeping sound from the phone, Qin Ruing handed the phone to Chen Shi and asked Chen Shi to look for information about the photo online. At the same time, Lin Xian sat in front of her desk and looked at the photo on the table with a blank expression. On her face, there was no trace of the happiness she had shown on the phone just now. There were two photo frames on the table. One was a full-body photo of her. The other, wasn't it the photo of Chen Shi and Qin Ruing? I also want to let the pirated students see this, so I can only put it in the main text. I hope you can forgive me. What I want to say is, the theme of this book is about stay-at-home dads, but it is also because of stay-at-home dads that my writing style is limited. Because of the existence of Nian Yan, every day that passes in the book, Nian Yan will grow up another day. Therefore, this book can't be like the common urban novels. In the blink of an eye, a month has passed. In the blink of an eye, a year has passed. Immortal cultivation and stay-at-home dads, in essence, are conflicting. Therefore, the plot of this book is usually not continuous. After all, there is always a cause, a process, and a result when something happens. And this process needs time to ferment. For example, this photo may be buried for half a year before it appears again. I hope everyone can understand what I mean, sincerely. Also, I update slowly, but I will never stop. This is for you to hear and also for me to hear. It is also a kind of self-warning. Regarding the issue of updating, I also want to try my best to return to a stable 2 updates a day, but I should have entered a bottleneck. I am very tired of writing and also very annoyed. I feel that every word I write is torture. I didn't ask for monthly votes on the day I put it up, because I expected this to happen, so I didn't dare to make careless promises. In short, I have already decided. I will start from 3 updates a day and slowly adjust back. Finally, thank you again for your continuous support. Chapter 275. World Photography Competition Exhibition. This award was very prestigious and professional, but it was too professional. Therefore, when the winners of the competition were announced, it didn't cause much of a stir on the internet. After all, compared to breaking news like a celebrity's infidelity, professional news was indeed too niche. Lin Xian said that Chen Shi and his wife were now online because of this photo titled Lovers, which really amazed many photography enthusiasts and insiders. Photography was the same as painting. It was to show static beauty to the world. But the difference between photography and painting was that painting could be created at will, while photography honestly recorded everything that happened at the time. The scenes shown in the photos were also scenes that had once appeared in this world. The selection method of the photography award was nothing more than the evaluation of the theme, scene, composition, exposure, tone, clarity, and several other aspects. The reason why this photo won first place in the professional portrait category was entirely because the couple in the photo was too dazzling. Just like a war photographer taking photos of refugees on the battlefield, the subject matter itself was a bonus. It was a kind of luck to be able to meet such an outstanding model in the vast sea of people. But the art of photography sometimes really did require a certain amount of luck. Weren't many world-famous classic photos captured by photographers by chance? Therefore, although the photographer named Sun Yuanyuan's skills were mediocre, she still managed to stand out from the rest of the entries and become a celebrity in the circle. And now, wasn't this award-winning photo on display at London's Somerset Palace? After she showed the news he found on the internet to Qin Ruoying, the couple didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It seemed that they had to pay more attention to protecting their portrait rights in the future. They didn't want to be online, so this kind of feeling of putting their photos on the internet for the world to see, it was a bit strange. However, since they had already given it, it was too late for regrets. Therefore, the couple could only adjust their mood and completely forget about this matter. Later, the couple accompanied the little girl to watch cartoons for a while, and then went out to find Lin Xian to catch up. The lunch location was chosen by Lin Xian. It was a Western restaurant with a good reputation and was very friendly. The restaurant's location was good. It was on the edge of the Dianjiang River. Sitting in the outdoor seats outside the restaurant, one could overlook the entire Dianjiang River. Perhaps it was because it was close to the business district, so when Qinshi's family arrived at the restaurant, there were already many business people in formal attire sitting there. Everyone was sitting by the river, admiring the beautiful scenery while discussing work. It could be considered a small bourgeois atmosphere. Here, as soon as Qinshi's family arrived at the restaurant, Lin Xian stood on the steps and waved at them excitedly. It had to be said that Lin Xian's outfit today was very eye-catching. As a professional woman who has lived in the CBD business circle for a long time, Lin Xian wore a dark blue dress and a well-cut long trench coat today. In addition, she had combed her short blonde hair into a bob with bangs, which not only reflected the capable temperament of an urban white-collar woman, but also had a unique charm of a mature woman. It was simply a beautiful scenery on the banks of the Dianjiang River. After Qin Ruoying heard Lin Xian's shout, she immediately waved at her. At this time, the little girl lying in Qinshi's arms finally saw Lin Xian, so she immediately waved her little hand and shouted at Lin Xian happily, "Sister! Sister!" As she shouted, she also motioned for Qinshi to put her down. After Qinshi put her down, the little girl took a step and ran toward Lin Xian. Lin Xian squatted on the ground and gently hugged the little girl in her arms. Then she pinched her little face and asked, "Nyan, how have you been recently? Did you miss sister?" "Sister, I miss you so much." The little girl's mouth was so sweet that it immediately made Lin Xian giggle. After all, this little thing had said before that she liked Lin Xian, so when she saw Lin Xian again, she was naturally very close to her. Seeing their daughter acting coquettishly in someone else's arms, the couple didn't mean to be jealous at all. Instead, they couldn't help but smile. When the two of them came closer, Lin Xian let go of the little girl, then got up and hugged Qin Ruoying intimately. After the hug, she said very exaggeratedly, "Long time no see, I missed you so much. Io, how did you become so beautiful again?" Hearing this, Qin Ruoying couldn't help but smile and ask, "You have such a sweet mouth, who did you learn it from?" Qin Ruoying hadn't seen Lin Xian for a long time. She originally thought that after so many years, she and Lin Xian's relationship would be much more distant. But she didn't expect that after meeting again, Lin Xian still gave her a very close feeling. Perhaps this was the so-called best friend? The two of them greeted each other. Then, Lin Xian pulled Qin Ruoying directly to a chair at the side, and then began to ask her where she had been all these years. This question really troubled Lin Xian for a long time, so much so that she even had some thoughts that she shouldn't have. But fortunately, these were all just thoughts that had just sprouted. But these thoughts were all strangled in the cradle by her in a timely manner. Therefore, when Lin Xian saw Qin Ruoying again, she couldn't wait to know the cause and effect. And regarding this problem, the couple had already discussed the countermeasures, so Qin Ruoying immediately made up a lie that was born out of the truth. The general meaning was, her family didn't agree to her marriage with Qinshi, so she could only abandon her husband and daughter and return to her hometown. These years, she didn't have a very good life. It wasn't until Qin Shi came to her hometown to find her that her family was moved by Qin Shi's sincerity and finally approved this marriage. The story wasn't very complicated, but Lin Xian couldn't help but frown slightly after hearing it. Ying, what era is this? Your family still pays attention to the words of the parents and the matchmaker? Why do I feel that with your personality, you shouldn't be so obedient to your family? Are you lying to me? Hearing this, Qin Ruing couldn't help but smile and ask, "Oh? Then tell me, why would I lie to you?" "I can't say it, but I keep feeling a little weird. I don't really believe what you said just now. What I said is the truth. If you don't believe me, then I can't help it, okay?" Seeing that Lin Xian nodded suspiciously, Qin Ruing decisively changed the topic and took the initiative to ask, Xian, what about you? How have you been these few years? Are you married? Do you have children?" Hearing this, Lin Xian's expression couldn't help but stiffen, but quickly returned to normal. After forcing a smile, she replied in a seemingly relaxed tone, "Not yet, but I can tell you a piece of good news." "What good news?" Chapter 276. Engagement? After Lin Xian's voice fell, even Qin Shi, who was next to her, could not help but turn his head to look at her. It had only been about half a year since the last time they parted at the dock. Who would have thought that Lin Xian was going to get engaged? "Who is it? Do I know him?" Qin Ruing threw out a series of questions, but Lin Xian smiled and shook her head after listening. She responded, "You don't know him." At this time, Qin Shi could not help but interrupt and ask, "Is it Li Xiuwen?" No matter what, Li Xiuwen had pursued Lin Xian for a long time. In addition, Wang Lu had been playing matchmaker and constantly putting good words for him in front of Lin Xian. So, if this lucky guy was Li Xiuwen, Qin Shi would not be surprised at all. However, what Qin Shi did not expect was, when he mentioned Li Xiuwen's name, Lin Xian still shook her head and replied calmly, "You don't know him either." Okay. Qin Shi nodded, then sat on the side and didn't say anything. In fact, after hearing the news that Lin Xian was going to get engaged, Qin Shi was also happy for Lin Xian from the bottom of his heart. After all, Lin Xian was not young anymore. It was hard enough for her to work alone in Zhonghai for so many years. If she could find someone to rely on, it would be a good thing for her. As for Lin Xian's little thoughts, it was obviously impossible for Qin Shi not to know. It was just that this kind of thing felt a little awkward just thinking about it, so he could only pretend to be confused. Qin Ruing did not know the little secret in Lin Xian's heart, so she continued to ask curiously, "You're going to get engaged? How long have you been together?" "It's been almost 4 months. "What? Only 4 months?" Qin Ruing was truly shocked by Lin Xian's words. Based on her understanding of Lin Xian should be very cautious when it came to relationships, so she really couldn't imagine how outstanding that man was to be able to get Lin Xian to the point where they were talking about marriage in just a few months. Xian, marriage is not child's play. You've only known each other for a few months, and you're already engaged. What's the difference between this and a flash marriage? Wasn't the most common ending of a flash marriage a flash divorce? Especially for women, if they were so careless about marriage, they would be completely irresponsible for their own future. Qin Ruing wanted to persuade Lin Xian to reconsider. However, Lin Xian seemed to have thought of everything. She smiled and gestured for her not to worry. Then she said, "Ying, don't worry. I'm not a little girl anymore. Do you think I'll be blinded by love? When I said that I was about to get engaged, there was actually a prerequisite." "What prerequisite?" "He has to pass my strict test." Lin Xian couldn't help but blink playfully. Seeing that Qin Ruing was still confused, she smiled and explained, "We're classmates." "Your daughter is already so old, but I'm still single. How can I not be anxious? How can my family not be anxious? Even if you're anxious, you can't be so careless." Qin Ruing rolled her eyes at Lin Xian in exasperation. Seeing this, Lin Xian held onto her hand and patiently explained, "Ying, listen to me. Actually, what I mean is that I'm not young anymore. Since I agreed to date someone, it's obvious that I'm aiming for marriage. Grandpa Mao once said that those who don't date for the purpose of marriage are all hooligans. So, I have to carefully examine him. If he can successfully pass my examination, then why can't I marry him? Qin Ruing was speechless. After hesitating for a long time, she asked with a puzzled expression, Xian, do you love him? Hearing this, Lin Xian couldn't help but chuckle. You might not know. How difficult is it to meet someone you like in this world who also likes you? Actually, a lot of people can only choose one of two. You can either choose the one you like or the one who likes you. I think I'm still very rational, so I choose the latter. Saying this, Lin Xian couldn't help but glance at Qin Shi. She seemed to be envious of the relationship between the couple. Seeing that Lin Xian had already said this, Qin Ruing naturally couldn't say anything else. Therefore, after hesitating for a while, she could only sincerely wish her well. Okay, although it's still a little rushed, I believe in your taste, so I wish you happiness in advance. All the best, Xian. Thank you. Perhaps because this topic was a little heavy, the two quickly changed the topic and then chatted about everything. Qin Ruing hadn't talked so much in a long time. After all, she didn't have many friends, and Lin Xian was one of the few that she had left. Therefore, after lunch, Qin Shi's family didn't rush to leave. Instead, they continued to accompany Lin Xian for afternoon tea. In the end, because Lin Xian received a call from her leader, saying that there was an urgent matter that required her to return to the company, Lin Xian could only reluctantly say goodbye to Qin Shi's family. Sister, goodbye. Lin Xian had just treated the little guy to a lot of desserts, which made the little guy very happy. Therefore, even though Qin Shi had already walked a distance away with her in his arms, the little guy still reluctantly turned back and waved at Lin Xian. Nyan, goodbye, sister will treat you to good food next time, come, moi, mu. Goodbye, sister. Hearing this, the little guy covered her mouth with both hands, gave Lin Xian a flying kiss, and then obediently returned to Qin Shi's arms. Lin Xian stood by the street until Qin Shi's family got into the car and left. She didn't leave. Just like that afternoon last year. It was a beautiful September day, and the pier was quiet. She stood under the palm tree, just like today, watching the car gradually disappear into the distance. Lin Xian was slightly absent-minded, but at this moment, a feminine man's voice suddenly sounded from behind her. Xian, I've been waiting by the side for so long, but you didn't even give me a chance to go on stage? Let me tell you, I'm angry. Lin Xian turned back to look, only to see a gay-looking man in tight pants, walking quickly towards her with a resentful expression. Seeing this, Lin Xian complained helplessly, didn't I tell you to wear a suit? Look at you, how can I introduce you to my friend? Xian, I've said it many times. Don't. Pretend. What's wrong with me wearing this? Why can't you introduce me to your friend? Hearing this, Lin Xian could only sigh, and turn to apologize to him. All right, it's my fault, I shouldn't have asked you to come. I apologize to you, don't be angry, okay? I'm not happy. I'm a little angry. All right, I'll treat you to coffee, don't be angry. Saying this, Lin Xian went up to the man's arm, and pulled him to a nearby coffee shop. As they walked, Lin Xian tilted her head to look at the sea not far away. The afternoon sun shone on the surface of the sea, as if the sea was coated with a layer of gold powder. The sparkling waves were almost blinding. In a daze, Lin Xian's thoughts drifted further and further away. Actually, she didn't know what she was thinking about. She asked herself, she wasn't a chaste woman, but why couldn't her heart hold anyone else? But what was the reason? Lin Xian really wanted to know the answer. But Chapter 277. After a short reunion with Lin Xian, Qin Ruing's mood became very happy. Although they hadn't seen each other for many years, after this afternoon's conversation, she was finally sure that there wasn't much of a gap between her and Lin Xian. They were still friends who could talk to each other. This was undoubtedly good news for Qin Ruing. After all, human beings were social animals. Even if Qin Ruing's temperament was outstanding, she still needed a few close friends to accompany her. The family of three was in a good mood. Therefore, since getting on the car, the little fellow had been sitting on her knees by the window in the back row, stretching out her head to look at the scenery outside the window. When she saw a gift shop on the street, she couldn't take her eyes off it. Because in the gift shop's cabinet facing the street, there was actually a huge teddy bear. The little fellow liked teddy bears very much, but she had never had a teddy bear of her own, so she immediately put her little hand on the window, pointed at the teddy bear in the distance and said, "Papa, I want that." The little fellow pulled Chin-Shi's arm, indicating that Chin-Shi should look in the direction she pointed. How sharp were Chin-Shi's eyes! With just a casual glance from the corner of his eyes, he already understood what the little fellow wanted. But when Chin-Shi saw what the little fellow wanted, he didn't promise to buy it for her. Instead, he pretended to be puzzled, as if he didn't see what the little fellow was pointing at. After the little girl anxiously shouted a few words, Chin-Shi put on an act and moved her head closer to the little girl. Then, she looked in the direction the little girl was pointing at. "Nyan, what do you want? Why didn't Papa see it? That, over there. Papa, bear, big bear. I want that, big bear." In a moment of excitement, the little fellow couldn't even speak clearly. "But, come, let me see again." Chin-Shi continued to pretend that he did not see anything. There was only one reason why he was acting like a fool, and that was, he didn't want to buy the teddy bear for the little girl at all. Of course, the reason why Chin-Shi didn't want to buy a teddy bear for the little guy was obviously not because of money, but because he was now thinking from the perspective of a parent. After all, the child was still young and had no sense of propriety. If he blindly obeyed the child, he would unknowingly hurt the child. Of course, this kind of damage was hidden. The so-called obedience was actually a disguised form of doting. This was also a taboo question for Chin-Shi. That was why he pretended to be crazy in order to fool them. The roads in the city were very crowded, so the taxi moved very slowly. However, no matter how slow the car was, when the green light came on, the taxi would still slowly move forward with the traffic. Therefore, after Chin-Shi pretended to dawdle for a while, the gift shop completely disappeared from the little fellow's sight. Looking at the teddy bear that she was so fond of disappearing, the little fellow immediately leaned on the back of the chair and pouted. No matter how Chin-Shi talked to her, she just turned her head and didn't say a word. Well, she was angry again. The couple looked at each other, and both of them couldn't help shaking their heads and laughing. The child's temper was getting worse and worse recently. If it went on like this, maybe she would be spoiled by them in the future? Although they didn't speak, they reached a consensus through their eyes. It was time to strangle this evil trend. The taxi continued to drive. After the little fellow's performance, the sunny sky just now unknowingly darkened at the moment. A large dark cloud appeared out of nowhere and hung over the city. It was as if it had suddenly dragged everyone from the sunny afternoon to the dark night. The street lights on both sides of the street continued to light up, and the cars on the road also turned on their headlights. The taxi driver stuck his head out of the window and looked up at the dark sky. He couldn't help but mutter in Zhonghai dialect, "It's going to rain." But what the driver didn't expect was that as soon as he finished speaking, bean-sized raindrops fell from the sky like a torrential downpour, hitting the whole car with a pitter-patter sound. A torrential rain began without any warning. This rain was very heavy. It was probably the heaviest rain that Chin-Shi had seen since he returned to Earth. Because the rain was too heavy, even if the driver adjusted the windshield wipers to the highest gear, he still couldn't see the front clearly. The taxi struggled to move forward in the pouring rain. According to common sense, a heavy rainstorm like this was usually a sudden shower, and it should soon clear up. But today's rain was beyond everyone's expectations. After going through untold hardships, the taxi finally brought Chin-Shi and his family back to the Kongju district. The rain didn't lessen at all, but became heavier and heavier. The rain poured down, and the wind howled. Because he didn't want to be too conspicuous, Chin-Shi took off his coat and held Qin-Ruoying by the corner, temporarily using the coat as an umbrella. Then, the couple rushed into the rain with the little fellow in their arms. Although Chin-Shi's coat was shielding her, the splashing rain continued to hit the little fellow's face. The rain soaked down her neck and soaked into her clothes, but the little thing didn't feel cold at all. Instead, she shouted happily, "Mom, come on. Papa, come on. Run faster. Run faster. We're almost home." The loud sound of the rain completely covered her excited screams. By the time the couple finally ran into the building with the little guy in their arms, the family of 3 had all become drowned rats. Perhaps it was because they hadn't been as embarrassed as today for a long time. So when the couple looked down at the little fellow who was still giggling in Chinchi's arms, the 2 of them couldn't help but giggle with the little thing. For a moment, the laughter of the family of 3 successfully covered the sound of the rain outside. But when the family was laughing foolishly, there was a sudden flash of light outside. Then a series of muffled thunder exploded in the sky. Rumble! The wind and rain blew, and thunder and lightning intertwined. This year's spring thunder seemed to come earlier than in previous years. The deafening thunder continued to sound, and every sound could make the little fellow in Chinchi's arms tremble with fear. Seeing this, Chinchi hurriedly hugged the little thing tightly in his arms, and at the same time used his vital essence to block most of the sound for her. And just when Chinchi was busy comforting the little fellow, Qin Ruoying seemed to have noticed something all of a sudden. She couldn't help but frown slightly. Then, with a puzzled expression, she came to the iron gate of the building and looked up at the gloomy sky. Chapter 278. Spring thunder sounded and everything grew. The so-called hibernation awakening referred to one of the 24 solar terms of the lunar calendar. This solar term represented that after the beginning of spring, the temperature gradually warmed up, and the spring thunder began to shake. All kinds of hibernating animals hibernating in the soil woke up, and nature was revitalized. It was precisely because of this that this day was called Hibernation Awakening by the ancients. Today happened to be the Hibernation Awakening Day. The thunder rumbled in the sky, and bean-sized raindrops continued to drip from the eaves, like beads with broken strings, and immediately splashed everywhere when they hit the ground. The rain and mist continued, so that the whole world became a foggy scene. After Qin Ruoying stood by the iron gate for a while, Chinchi came to her with the little girl in his arms. "What's wrong?" "There's an indescribable feeling. It feels weird," Qin Ruoying answered Chinchi's question while stretching her hand out of the eaves. Looking at the raindrops constantly hitting her hand, Qin Ruoying's doubts in her eyes became stronger. "Oh." Although Qin Ruoying couldn't describe her feelings, Chinchi seemed to be able to understand her after thinking about it, so he immediately asked, "Do you feel that this rain is like a gauze, covering your body with a light and comfortable flutter?" "You feel it too?" Hearing this, Qin Ruoying couldn't help but feel happy. She thought it was her own psychological effect, but she didn't expect Chinchi to feel it too. That feeling, in fact, it was like sleeping with the air conditioner on in summer. It was just that this silk was very large, thin, and smooth, giving people a very comfortable feeling. Perhaps because she felt so comfortable, Qin Ruoying couldn't help but want to go into the rain, ready to experience that feeling again. However, just as Qin Ruoying was about to walk out of the eaves, she suddenly stopped her. "Ying, go home first. You have to give Nian a bath and change clothes." "All right." After hearing Chinchi's words, Qin Ruoying suddenly came back to her senses. This storm, it was as if there was a strange magic that made her subconsciously want to stand in the rain. After looking at the storm outside thoughtfully, Qin Ruoying reluctantly followed Chinchi upstairs and went home. After reaching home, she began to busy herself with bathing the little guy. At this time, Chinchi took the time to go to the shopping mall not far from the community. While buying groceries, he also bought a set of clothes for the little girl. This little thing was especially naughty when it was bathing. It splashed water and made a fuss. It simply treated bathing as a parent-child game, so it would dawdle for a long time every time. Therefore, when Qin Ruoying finally helped her to take a bath and change into cartoon pajamas for her, she was almost done with dinner. Today's dinner was very simple. Kung Pao chicken, green pepper fried meat, tomato scrambled eggs, plus a winter melon soup. It was the most common family dish. Although the ingredients used for this home-cooked meal were simple and easy to handle, under Chinchi's exquisite control, it could be said to be full of color, aroma, and taste. Although the little guy also had many small problems common to children at the same time, she also had an advantage, which was that she never dawdled when it came to eating. When it came to eating, she would run faster than anyone else. Therefore, just as Qin Ruing turned off the hairdryer, the little guy with a head of disheveled hair rushed to the side of the coffee table, picked up the spoon, and scooped up the soup. After all, her father's cooking was the best in the world. After dinner, after watching a few episodes of cartoons, it was 8:30 in the evening. Maybe it was because she was too noisy when she was bathing just now, so the little guy's eyelids were already twitching when she was only halfway through the cartoon. When she saw the little guy's sleepy look, he directly carried her to the bedroom. After a few words of coaxing, the little thing fell into a deep sleep. In order to prevent the little guy from being awakened by the thunder, she specially set up a soundproof restriction in the room. When he finished everything, closed the bedroom door and came to the living room, Qin Ruing was already standing on the balcony and continued to reach out to catch the rain outside. After noticing Shi's arrival, Qin Ruing didn't even turn her head and asked directly, "Why does this rain make me feel so refreshed and refreshed?" Hearing this, she didn't immediately answer. Instead, he gently held her lower abdomen with his left hand, then stretched out his right hand and held her hand from below. This shape was very similar to the classic bow pass in the Titanic. She sniffed the faint fragrance from Qin Ruing's hair. When he was about to answer her question, a sudden clap of thunder exploded in the sky again. Rumble! The thunder was very close. It was like a grenade exploding next to them. It was deafening. Therefore, after the thunder sounded, there was a burst of screams in the community. Many people were afraid of thunder. But fortunately, a thunderstorm of this magnitude might not be seen even once a year. Under normal circumstances, thunderstorms usually didn't last too long. At most, it would completely stop after a few hours. They didn't know what was going on today. This thunderstorm lasted for more than 3 hours, but there was still no sign of it weakening. If this continued, many people would lose sleep tonight. She gently hugged Qin Ruing. When the rolling thunder finally stopped, he whispered in Qin Ruing's ear, "The tide is rising." To be honest, she didn't think that there would be a spirit energy tide in a super first-tier international city like Zhonghai. What was even more surprising was, the scale of this spirit energy tide was far greater than the scale caused by the Qinling spirit binding array. The spirit energy contained in it was even denser than the spirit fog in the Sayakin Glacier. Therefore, every drop of rain that fell from the sky contained a lot of spiritual qi of heaven and earth. How was this a simple thunderstorm? This was spiritual liquid from the sky. After briefly explaining to Qin Ruing what a spirit energy tide was, she took her back to the living room and then set up a spirit gathering array for her to cultivate. After all, cultivation was a matter of accumulation over a long period of time. Even if this sudden tide of spirit energy couldn't cause Qin Ruing's realm to advance by leaps and bounds, it could still save her a lot of effort. After all, it was a good thing with no harm. Naturally, she had to cherish this opportunity. The reason why Qin Ruing wanted to go into the rain just now was that she had succeeded in her cultivation, so she instinctively wanted to go to places with rich spirit energy. She sat cross-legged next to Qin Ruing until she entered the deepest level of meditation. Then he got up and went to the balcony. The wind and rain were still outside. She stood on the balcony motionlessly, as if he was waiting for something. Sure enough, about an hour later, a deafening clap of thunder rang out from the horizon again. But this time, the instant the thunder rang out, the entire earth seemed to tremble along with it. Chapter 279. Thunder rumbled, and the earth quaked and the mountains shook. Just as the thunder roared, the entire ground shook violently. In just an instant, the pots, bowls, ladles, basins, chandeliers, photo frames, and other small objects in the room began to shake violently. They either fell on the table or fell to the ground, making a series of clanking sounds. An earthquake. Because of the frequent earthquakes in recent years, the people of Huaxia had a much deeper understanding of earthquakes than before. Therefore, the moment the earthquake happened, the entire community seemed to have been awakened from their sleep by the thunder. Countless people screamed, "Earthquake!" as they rushed out of their houses in a panic. There was the sound of dense footsteps in the corridor. Some residents who were taking a shower did not even have time to put on their clothes at this moment. They ran out of their houses wrapped in a bath towel. It was still raining heavily outside, but at this time, no one cared so much. The fleeing crowd surged like a flood and rushed madly toward the gate of the community. In less than 2 minutes, the streets outside the community were already densely packed with people, blocking the entire road. According to historical records, there had never been a destructive earthquake of magnitude 4 or above in the history of Zhonghai. This was because Zhonghai was located in the most stable plate position in the entire Huaxia. It was not in the earthquake zone at all, so let alone a destructive earthquake, even a weak earthquake of magnitude 2 or 3 would be difficult to occur. But today, the people of Zhonghai experienced what it felt like to be in the middle of an earthquake. In fact, when the Wenchuan earthquake happened that year, Zhonghai, which was thousands of miles away, also felt it and even caused a big commotion. However, that big earthquake happened more than 2,000 kilometers away in the Chuanyu area after all, so it was far from being as real and exciting as today. Based on the strong tremor just now, this earthquake was at least a magnitude 4, 5 or above, reaching at least the level of a medium-strong earthquake. The earthquake didn't last long. It lasted for about 20 seconds. However, it was this short 20 seconds that really made many people feel like they had escaped death. People who had not experienced an earthquake might not be able to imagine what kind of oppressive feeling an earthquake would bring to people. Perhaps it was only when humans faced the wrath of nature that they would realize how insignificant they were. The downpour continued, but none of the people on the streets dared to return to the residential area. Everyone stood pitifully in the rain, looking at each other. That helpless look was as miserable as it could be, but at this moment, another thunderclap exploded in the sky. Rumble! Rumble! The people on the street didn't even have time to cover their ears before the strong tremors appeared again. In such a situation, not to mention the children, even some of the more timid females were completely scared out of their wits at this moment. After their legs trembled, they sat down on the ground and held their heads in their hands as they cried out loud. For a moment, the entire street seemed to have turned into a refugee camp. Even the torrential rain could not suppress the continuous cries from the crowd. While fear, helplessness, cold, and other negative emotions filled the entire street, there was a little fellow who was still sleeping soundly on the bed. Perhaps it was because sleeping in the rain was very comfortable, so this little thing rolled a few times in her sleep in a daze. She wrapped herself in the blanket like a cicada cocoon before continuing to sleep. Qin Ruoying opened her eyes the moment the earthquake happened. She was originally a little worried about whether the earthquake would endanger Nian Yan's safety, but after seeing Qin Shi smile and shake his head at her, Qin Ruoying's slightly anxious heart immediately calmed down. As long as Qin Shi was there, she didn't have to worry about her and Nian Yan's safety at all. It had to be said that this feeling was very comfortable and at the same time, very reliable. In fact, as long as Qin Shi was there, not only the mother and daughter, but even the residents of this entire street would not be in any danger. After all, Qin Shi was not the kind of indifferent passerby who would not save someone in need. And speaking of which, wasn't it just a shake? What was the big deal? Qin Shi stood on the balcony and looked into the distance motionlessly. It was not until the third aftershock occurred that he suddenly turned around and returned to the living room. After briefly explaining the situation to Qin Ruoying and indicating that she did not have to worry, Qin Shi set up a series of restrictions in the room. Then he directly left the house. He wanted to see what was the difference between this sudden heaven and earth anomaly and the previous two. After all, Qin Shi was not a weather satellite, and he did not have the leisure to explore heaven and earth anomalies, so he had no idea how many heaven and earth anomalies had occurred on Earth. Take the 2 times that he knew, the first time was in the Taklamakan Desert, and the second time was in the Siachen Glacier. Both times, heaven and earth anomalies appeared in the remote border areas. But this time, the heaven and earth anomaly appeared in Zhonghai. In this international metropolis with a total population of as many as 25 million people. One had to know that although ordinary people did not know how to cultivate, as the spirit of all things, humans still instinctively absorbed some heaven and earth spirit energy. Even if each person could only absorb a little, with such a large population base, the heaven and earth spirit energy in Zhonghai would naturally become very sparse. In this regard, Zhonghai and Shangjing could not be compared at all. Although the total population of Shangjing was as many as 20 million, Shangjing was the imperial capital of 5 dynasties. The emperors of each dynasty liked to choose Shangjing as their capital. It was precisely because Shangjing itself was a paradise, located at the head of the dragon veins, so no matter how large the population of Shangjing was, Zhonghai still had such rich heaven and earth spirit energy. Therefore, if there was a heaven and earth anomaly in Shangjing, Qin would not be surprised at all. But the strange thing was that there was no heaven and earth anomaly in Shangjing, but in Zhonghai, a new city that had only been prosperous for 100 or 200 years, there was one. How could this not surprise Qin? As he flew, Qin pondered the question of why there would be a heaven and earth anomaly in Zhonghai. In fact, if you put aside the dragon veins, Zhonghai could really be considered a blessed land. But that was because, as a coastal city, Zhonghai rarely had natural disasters such as typhoons, earthquakes, and tsunamis since ancient times. It was close to the river, the sea, and the plains, far away from the earthquake zone, and there were multiple island chains in the outer sea to block tsunamis. Such a unique geographical advantage was extremely rare even in the world. Thinking about it carefully, other than the lack of the dragon veins and the sparse spirit energy, Zhonghai seemed to have no shortcomings. But these were only geographical advantages, and had nothing to do with heaven and earth spirit energy or heaven and earth anomalies. The more Qin thought about it, the more confused he became. But at this moment, a flash of inspiration flashed in his mind, and he suddenly thought of a very important question. 5 years ago, wasn't it also during this thunderstorm that he suddenly went from earth to heavenly jade? Thunderstorm? Spirit energy recovery? Heaven and earth anomaly? Heavenly jade world? The moment this question popped up, Qin's figure suddenly stopped in midair. His entire body froze. For a long time. It was not until the sound of thunder sounded again that Qin seemed to be awakened from his sleep by a gong. He could not help but exclaim. Chapter 280. 5 years ago. Qin was just an ordinary person who couldn't be more ordinary. At that time, he had dreams, was willing to work hard, and could endure hardships. Although his life was a little shabby, he always thought that he was very happy and would be even happier in the future. Humans would always have hope for the future. Qin always believed in an old saying, knowledge can change fate. But what he didn't expect was that before he could wait for the day when knowledge could change fate, a rainstorm had already changed his fate in advance. If it wasn't for the sudden thunderstorm, what would he be like now? Qin didn't know. And no one could know. His fate was inexplicably changed just like that. Although the process was difficult, the ending seemed to be much better than before. After all, in the past, he only knew how to code, but now he could fly and burrow into the ground. Therefore, Qin was really a little curious. Why did this great gift bag of changing fate fall on his head? Although he didn't know if there was a spirit energy tide on that rainstorm 5 years ago. But based on the scale of today's tide, the spirit energy contained in it was actually far from enough to instantly teleport a person from Earth to the heavenly jade world. Therefore, he could conclude that either the scale of the spirit energy tide 5 years ago was far greater than today, or there were still some unknown large-scale formations or magic treasures hidden in the super first-tier city of Zhonghai, and those formations and magic treasures were all intact legendary existences. In short, no matter what the reason was, the truth behind it was far from what he could pry into with his current strength. It hadn't been long since Qin returned to Earth, but in this short period of half a year, he had already encountered a series of unimaginable things. And the question that puzzled him the most was, why was it that until today, except for an unknown divine general, he hadn't encountered anyone above the celestial being level? This didn't seem to make sense. Thinking of this, Qin couldn't help but make a bold guess in his heart. Perhaps Earth was originally a cultivation planet similar to the heavenly jade world? Until one day, due to some unknown reason, the Earth's spirit chi dried up, so the Earth was completely reduced to a Vipralopa planet? For immortal cultivators, the planet of the last days was like an uninhabitable desert. Therefore, at this time, leaving Earth was obviously their only choice. The immortal cultivators on Earth had left, and the inheritances they left behind could not be cultivated at all because of the sparse spiritual energy. Therefore, they were gradually reconstructed and simplified, turning into a series of inheritances like necromancers, warriors, onmyoji, and so on. She stroked his chin, faintly feeling that his guess might be somewhat close to the truth. It was probably because of the existence of high-level immortal cultivators on Earth that the Siakan Glacier had such a mysterious palace that could affect the flow of time. She had already tasted the benefits of the Great Hall. Now that he suddenly realized that there might also be something of the same level as the Great Hall in Zhonghai, she couldn't help but feel a little moved. The reason why he hadn't taken the initiative to search for them before was mainly because his soul had yet to recover from its injuries at that time. Without his divine sense, he couldn't just wander around this huge city by relying on his eyes alone, could he? Today, coincidentally, the spirit chi tide had appeared again. Perhaps he could take this opportunity to find the thing that had sent him to heavenly spiral from the surging spirit chi of heaven and earth. She seriously pondered for a while in the sky. Then, as if he had made a decision, he directly flew towards the seaside. The reason why he wanted to go to the seaside was because the spirit chi on the seaside was much denser than in the city. It was obviously somewhat abnormal. She quickly arrived at the seaside. However, before he had time to see the situation on the sea clearly, the sound of waves rumbled into his ears one after another. At this moment, the sky was already dark. Coupled with the dark clouds and torrential rain, there was not a single bit of light on the sea. Seeing this, she immediately lit up a ball of light and threw it out. Only then did he finally see the situation on the sea clearly. He saw that the waves, which were more than 10 meters tall, were raised high like a wall of water. Then, they heavily slammed onto the shore. The waves came one after another, and the sound of waves crashing onto the shore came one after another. That majestic scene could be described as, rapid waves rise to the sky, raging waves roll to the ground. The majestic sound was like thunder, and the surging waves were like rolling snow. Fortunately, the torrential rain had driven away the tourists by the seaside. Otherwise, with the waves, which were more than 10 meters tall, coming wave after wave, who knew how many people would die on the spot? Looking at the situation, it seemed like there was a tsunami. However, from a scientific point of view, it was basically impossible for a tsunami to occur in Zhonghai. If there was a tsunami in Zhonghai, then the island country and the Gulf Coast in front of it would have become an underwater world by now. However, there was even an earthquake in Zhonghai today. What was so strange about a tsunami? She didn't stay at the seaside for too long. After briefly checking the situation along the coast, he directly flew towards the depths of the sea. The spirit chi of heaven and earth was getting denser and denser. Could it be, this time, the heaven and earth phenomenon really appeared on the sea? She frowned and looked at the sea surface as he continued to fly forward. After flying for about another 2 minutes, he finally arrived at the place where the spirit energy was the most concentrated. This location was no longer in Huaxia, but in the international waters of the Pacific Ocean. If he continued to fly forward, it wouldn't take long for him to reach Japan's territory. It was worth noting that even though Shi had flown so far, he still hadn't flown out of the range of the thunderstorm. From this, it could be seen how huge the scale of this thunderstorm was. Shi lit up another light ball. After looking around the surrounding environment, he descended to a height of about 10 meters above the sea surface. The sea surface below was very calm, and the slightly rippling sea surface seemed to be silently telling him, "There's nothing here." However, Shi wasn't stupid. The coastal area had surging waves and raging waves crashing onto the shore, but here, the sea was calm and the waves were vast. Wasn't this strange enough? After seeing the heaven and earth phenomenon in the Siakan Glacier, he was already mentally prepared. Although he didn't know why there was no spirit fog here, in terms of the concentration of spirit energy, this place was not inferior to the Saikin Glacier at all. Therefore, Chen Shi could conclude that the heaven and earth phenomenon would definitely appear here. After confirming that there was nothing strange at the bottom of the sea, Chen Shi simply sat cross-legged on the sea surface, cultivating while silently waiting for the heaven and earth phenomenon to appear. After about an hour, he suddenly opened his eyes. There was finally movement on the sea surface. Chen Shi placed the light ball not far above the sea surface. Through the light emitted by the light ball, he could clearly see that a whirlpool suddenly appeared on the sea surface. The whirlpool was very small at first, and it looked like the whirlpool caused by a swimming pool when water was released. Its diameter was only about 50 centimeters. However, as time passed, the whirlpool began to expand rapidly at a speed visible to the naked eye. About 5 minutes later. Chapter 281. On the vast ocean, a huge whirlpool suddenly appeared. Under the illumination of the light ball, one could clearly see that the center of the whirlpool was rippling with white waves. The waves were surging, roaring, and howling. From afar, the whirlpool looked like a giant funnel. The slanted inner wall formed a 45-degree angle with the horizon. The waves, which had always been a symbol of beauty, now looked like sharp blades in a meat grinder, giving off a gloomy and terrifying feeling. In addition, there was a dark hole in the center of the whirlpool. When the light from the light ball shone into the hole, it was like shining into a bottomless abyss. The darkness swallowed everything, so much so that Chen Shi could only see the entrance of the hole. He couldn't see anything else. What kind of whirlpool was this? It was like a ferocious beast, opening its huge mouth full of sharp teeth and fiercely letting out a deafening roar towards the sky. From a scientific point of view, the larger the whirlpool, the greater its destructive power. In order to form such a huge whirlpool, it must contain an enormous amount of energy. Chen Shi was a top graduate from a top university in China, and he studied differential geometry in university. Unfortunately, at that time, he didn't have the photographic memory that he had now, so he had already returned the Stokes theorem and Maxwell-Faraday equations to his teacher. Now, he obviously couldn't calculate the strength of the whirlpool in front of him. However, even though he couldn't calculate the specific data, he could still make a bold guess. Based on the size of this whirlpool, which was thousands of meters in diameter, even if the United States Nimitz aircraft carrier came here, it would probably be instantly sucked into the whirlpool, then be turned into a pile of scrap metal by the sharp waves. After all, the Nimitz was only 300 meters long. In the face of such a huge whirlpool, what was the difference between an aircraft carrier and an ordinary fishing boat? It was just a question of who would sink first and who would sink later. The whirlpool in front of him was so dangerous, but Chen Shi didn't seem to care at all. Therefore, after a brief observation, he actually plunged into the pitch-black cave. One had to know that the center of the vortex had a high flow rate and low pressure, while the edge had a high flow rate and high pressure. There would be a huge pressure difference between the two. Under the effect of the pressure, the vortex could swallow everything that could be swallowed. This principle was quite similar to that of a black hole. Therefore, after Chen Shi flew into the center of the whirlpool, he immediately felt a huge pulling force coming from all directions. Although this power was strong enough to tear apart steel, to Chen Shi, it was still too childish. Thus, after using his true essence to prop up a barrier, Chen Shi sat in the center of the whirlpool and began to cultivate. The whirlpool spun rapidly like a black hole, constantly devouring the surrounding spiritual energy. Because of the appearance of the spirit chi tide today, the density of the spirit chi of heaven and earth was naturally countless times higher than before. In addition, the whirlpool was constantly devouring and compressing the surrounding spirit chi of heaven and earth. After the two overlapped, it actually caused the spirit chi of heaven and earth in the center of the whirlpool to directly condense from a gaseous state into a liquid state. Chen Shi originally thought that with his soul formation stage cultivation, he could absorb all the spirit chi of heaven and earth in less than 100 years. Now it seemed that this idea was indeed a bit too naive. It was simply a fool's dream. However, this was also good. At least he didn't have to hold back anymore and could finally go all out. Therefore, Qin, who was sitting cross-legged in the center of the whirlpool, seemed to have turned into a glutton. The whirlpool was responsible for gathering the nearby spirit qi of heaven and earth for him, and he only needed to madly devour it. Because the spirit liquid was too pure, every drop contained a huge amount of spirit qi of heaven and earth. Therefore, in less than half an hour, Qin actually successfully condensed a drop of blood essence. This was undoubtedly a great thing for him, who only had one drop of blood essence left. Previously, he had the soul crystal to nourish his divine soul. Now, he had the spirit liquid to condense his blood essence. At the same time, he also found a temple where the flow of time was different from the outside world. Since the recovery of the spirit qi, good things had been happening one after another. Thinking of this, Qin couldn't help but smile. At this rate, he estimated that it wouldn't be long before he could return to the peak and take a step towards the insightful emptiness realm. Qin was happy for a while. He planned to take advantage of this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to condense the third drop of blood essence in one go in preparation for his future cultivation. However, at this moment, an accident suddenly occurred. The pulling force of the whirlpool suddenly weakened, and the speed of the water in the center also began to rapidly slow down. This also caused the whirlpool to become smaller and smaller, just like when it first appeared. In less than a few minutes, the huge whirlpool actually shrank back to its original size. Qin frowned and flew out of the sea. The spirit qi had not dissipated, but why did the whirlpool disappear? Qin looked around in confusion. At this moment, a rumbling sound of thunder suddenly came from the sky. Boom! Thunder again. However, unlike before, the thunder appeared together with lightning. Chapter 282. A person. Just like an airdrop, he was directly dropped from the sky by a transport plane. With the help of a flash of lightning, Qin could clearly see that the person was only wearing a black combat suit. He didn't wear a parachute or a flight suit. After being dropped by the transport plane, the person spread out his hands and did a free fall in the sky. The height of the cumulonimbus cloud was generally between 600 and 2,000 meters. Tonight's thunderclouds gave people a strong sense of oppression, so it could be speculated that the height of the clouds tonight should be about 1,000 meters. 1,000 meters was actually not that high. It would take less than 15 seconds for an object to fall from a height of 1,000 meters. It was a short time, but the falling speed was very fast. When an object fell from a high altitude, due to the acceleration of gravity, the falling speed would become faster and faster. In contrast, the object would be subjected to greater and greater air resistance. When the air resistance reached a certain level, the air resistance would balance with gravity, causing the object to begin to move at a uniform speed. This speed was also called the ultimate speed or the finishing speed. Assuming that this person weighed 60 kilograms, then through the formula V equals, this person's ultimate speed would be 617.4 kilometers per hour. Falling into the sea at such a speed was no different from falling on a steel plate. With a smack sound, the person would probably be like a cake falling to the ground, instantly turning into a pool of paste. Of course, the above was only a hypothesis from a scientific point of view. Obviously, this outsider, in front of him, could not be judged by common sense. Sure enough, when the person fell into the sea, after the huge impact was offset by the seawater, he immediately got out of the sea as if nothing had happened. Then he stepped on the stormy waves and went straight in the direction of Qin. He was indeed running. In ancient times, there was a dharma crossing the river with a reed, but this person did not even use a reed. He just stepped on the waves and ran directly. This directly showed that he had broken through the limits of the human body and stood at the peak of martial arts. And this was the so-called celestial. Qin floated in the air more than 10 meters above the sea and quietly watched the person running towards him. It was a man who looked about 30 years old. Although he was wearing a combat suit, he did not have any badge to prove his identity. This was not Hua Xia's territory, but a public area in the world. According to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, Any country had the right to interrogate and search stateless people and ships on the high seas. Therefore, this kind of behavior that did not even reveal his identity was actually very eye-catching. However, looking at his face, this man should be Hua Xia's person. The man ran wildly on the waves and soon came not far below Chen Shi. With the light ball around Chen Shi, the man saw Chen Shi's appearance. Immediately after that, he could not help but show a smile on his face and shouted excitedly, "Mr. Chen, I didn't expect it's you." His voice was so loud that even the sound of the stormy waves was drowned out. But what made him feel strange was that Chen Shi did not immediately respond after hearing his words. Instead, he stretched out his hand and pointed to the sea in the distance. Seeing this, the man immediately turned his head and looked in the direction Chen Shi pointed with some doubts. Perhaps because the sky was too dark and his vision was limited, the man looked for a while and did not find anything strange. Just when he was a little puzzled, a few strong lights suddenly appeared on the horizon in the distance. It was the light beam emitted by the military hernia searchlight. The rated power of 15 million watts also made the range of this searchlight reach up to 2,000 meters. It was also a necessary device for ships cruising at sea. As the searchlight's light became brighter and brighter, the man finally saw the appearance of the ship. It was a destroyer with the flag of the United States. Looking at the aggressive posture, it should be the American Army stationed in Okinawa. The rain poured down, and the thunder rumbled in the sky. The waterspout, like a pillar supporting the sky, seemed to have taken root and did not move from beginning to end. After the destroyer shone its searchlight on the waterspout from a distance, it immediately anchored 2 kilometers away. It seemed that it did not dare to get closer. However, although the destroyer did not dare to get closer, it still released a patrol boat. Afterward, the boat rushed straight in the direction of the waterspout with an unstoppable momentum. The sea today was not calm. There were whirlpools and waterspouts, and the waves were at least 3 or 4 meters high. But for some reason, even if the boat was about to be lifted up by the waves, it was able to fall back to the water safely in the end, and then continue to move forward. The waterspout rotated at high speed, like a giant dragon, constantly sucking the sea water from the sea to the sky. In the face of such a huge suction force, not to mention the boat, even the destroyer would be sent to the sky in an instant after approaching. It was unknown who the helmsman of this boat was, but the control of the boat and the judgment of the distance were extremely accurate. Therefore, under the delicate control of the helmsman, the moment the boat was about to enter the edge of the waterspout, it suddenly turned the bow, and then began to circle around the waterspout in a very extreme way. This was already the last safe distance. Chapter 283. After hearing Ijiro's greeting, Chen Shi didn't respond to him. After all, as a Huaxia man, he would always feel some hostility towards a strange Japanese. In contrast, the Huaxia man in front of him was obviously easier to get Chen Shi's approval. Therefore, after looking around, Chen Shi focused his attention on the Huaxia man in front of him, then he sat cross-legged in the air, lowered his head and said to him, "Look, they even brought a warship here, but you're all alone. Don't you think it's a bit too shabby?" Hearing this, the man shook his head and smiled bitterly. His name was Qin Shuai, one of the main people in charge of the Wulian branch in Zhonghai, in charge of intelligence. Qin Shuai had just stepped into the diviner stage, so his realm was not very stable, so his rating in the Wuyan was only S-. The reason why he came here alone was because this was not a mission issued by the Wulian, but his own personal action. Tonight, there were all kinds of almost impossible natural disasters in Zhonghai, so the Wulian branch of Zhonghai naturally had to be dispatched to prevent any uncontrollable accidents. Qin Shuai originally had a mission, but as the only diviner in the Zhonghai branch, he was keenly aware of a huge amount of energy at sea, so he mobilized a transport plane to send him here to check the situation. But what Qin Shuai didn't expect was that when he arrived at the destination, he saw a person here. When Chen Shi's family traveled, they never deliberately hid their identity, so Qin Shuai always knew that Chen Shi was in Zhonghai. Therefore, when he first saw the figure, Qin Shuai subconsciously thought that this person should be Chen Shi, so he changed his original plan and directly jumped out of the plane. The result was as he expected. The person in front of him was indeed Qin Shi. Everyone in the Wu Yan branch knew about the new EX level existence. Qin Shui made a simple self-introduction, after which Qin Shi nodded slightly and then asked, "Can you fly?" Qin Shi was about 10 meters above the sea, about 3 or 4 stories high, so Qin Shui could only slightly raise his head when talking to him. After hearing Qin Shi's words, Qin Shui was stunned for a moment, then he replied with a troubled expression, "Yes, but not for too long. As far as Qin Shui knew, if it wasn't necessary, he would never fly." After all, for a martial artist, this kind of meaningless consumption was actually the same as an athlete who had to play a game the next day. After hearing Qin Shui's words, Qin Shi gently waved his hand. Immediately after, a gentle force surrounded Qin Shui. Qin Shui's body suddenly. Because he knew that Qin Shi wouldn't attack him for no reason, he didn't resist too fiercely. So, he just stared blankly as Qin Shi lifted him into the air. This action is this. It's really not as good as seeing it in person. As the water spout continued to rotate, the density of the world's spiritual energy also began to rise, and soon it reached the level of the vortex just now. The tide of spiritual energy is extremely rare. Even Qin Shi wanted to take this opportunity to heal the injuries in his body, let alone Qin Shui. Therefore, under Qin Shi's guidance, Qin Shui sat cross-legged in the air and began to silently cultivate. Although Qin Shui didn't have a complete set of immortal cultivation methods, after all, he had reached the level of a celestial, so he had faintly grasped some of the principles of heaven and earth, and instinctively wanted to absorb the world's spiritual energy into his body. On the other side, Saito Ijiro sent a polite greeting to Qin Shi, but Qin Shi didn't respond, which made him quite dissatisfied, so he ignored Qin Shi and sat on the small boat to cultivate. At the same time, not far away on a destroyer, several heavily armed soldiers were standing in the cockpit, silently observing everything in front of them. These soldiers were all blonde United States people, and most of them were more than 9 meters tall. Compared to the ordinary staff in the cockpit, they looked like giants. One of the soldiers was holding a tablet in his hand, and he was constantly pointing on it. "Reporting, Captain, the energy index is still rising, and it will reach the expected peak in about 10 minutes. Very good, continue to observe. Did you find the information of the 2 Huaxia people?" "Yes, one is called Qin Shui, S-, and the other is called Qin Shi, EX. EX?" Hearing this, the leading soldier couldn't help but frown slightly. "Yes, we don't have relevant information in our database. This is the strength evaluation given by Yinyang Liao." "What's the basis of the evaluation?" "There's only one battle video so far. Let me see." After that, the captain-like man took the tablet from his companion and clicked on the video. The video was taken by a surveillance satellite, and the location was in the Golden Triangle, Meimen. The video was divided into several segments, one of which was the scene where Qin Shi crushed the missile with one hand. The video was very short, only 10 seconds long. After watching it, the man called the captain couldn't help but sneer. "This is the so-called mysterious power of the East? Eric, what do you think?" Translation, not bad, not bad. Note, in the future, foreigners will use the only official language of the universe, Chinese. After that, the man called Eric shrugged his shoulders with a look of disdain. To be honest, even trash like Ijiro Saito can get an S rating from Yinyang Liao, so I don't think this strength evaluation is credible. When he said this, his companion couldn't help but laugh. As the only superpower in the world, the people of the United States were naturally born with pride. The Japanese were a very strange people. They didn't seem to hate the United States who dropped the atomic bomb. Instead, they felt that the United States was the savior of Japan. Many fanatics even praised the United States with gratitude. Therefore, Ijiro Saito was very humble in front of the people of the United States. But what Ijiro Saito didn't expect was that his humility lowered his evaluation in the hearts of the people of the United States, and even affected the credibility of Enyang Liao's strength evaluation. As time went by, the waterspout did not become smaller, but thicker and thicker. About half an hour later, the energy contained in the waterspout seemed to have reached its limit. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning struck the waterspout. The waterspout immediately became like an electrified light tube, and light blue snake-shaped electric arcs flashed wildly in it. A huge amount of energy filled it, and the waterspout suddenly expanded more than 10 meters outward at a speed visible to the naked eye. It looked like it was about to explode. Qin Shui opened his eyes and looked at the scene in front of him. Before he could recover, he was pulled back by Chen Shi and instantly retreated hundreds of meters away. At this time, the waterspout also began to shake violently. Qin Shui had never seen such a scene, so he couldn't help but ask, "What's going on?" However, before Chen Shi could answer his question, the waterspout in front of him suddenly changed again. The originally thick waterspout suddenly separated from the sky and became two in an instant. The two waterspouts rotated and intersected, spiraling straight into the sky, and their shape looked somewhat similar to a fried dough twist. Chen Shi frowned slightly, because he suddenly found that all the surrounding spiritual energy was madly rushing towards the center of the two waterspouts. And with the continuous influx of spiritual energy, a bright light suddenly appeared in a position in the middle of the two waterspouts. The light was white, and at first it was only the size of a star. But after a few breaths, the light suddenly burst into an extremely dazzling light. Like the rising sun, it instantly dispelled all the haze between heaven and earth. Such a dazzling light suddenly made Qin Shui couldn't help but close his eyes and slightly tilt his head, not daring to look at it again. But Chen Shi didn't seem to be affected at all. She raised her head slightly and calmly looked at the source of the light. Finally, Chapter 284. The two waterspouts spiraled into the sky. Rumbling sounds of thunder rang out one after another. When the lightning struck the huge water tornadoes, countless light blue electric currents immediately surged wildly within the water tornadoes, so much so that the two water tornadoes faintly glowed with blue light. Then, the electric currents in the water columns suddenly converged at the center of the waterspouts, emitting a faint white light that looked like stars at night. With the continuous influx of spirit energy, the white light suddenly became like the sun, bursting with an extremely dazzling light. The white light dispelled the dark haze between heaven and earth, and even the thunderstorm that had not stopped just now strangely stopped. This was really a very strange scene. It was around 9 o'clock in the evening, and the sun had already drilled from the northern hemisphere to the southern hemisphere. But under the white light, it seemed to bring people to a sunny afternoon. The wind was gentle, the sun was bright, and the sea was blue. The salty sea breeze kept slapping on their faces. If there were no two violent waterspouts, the whole scene could be said to be perfect. The two waterspouts continued to revolve around the ball of light, just like two gigantic dragons that were having fun. Flood dragons going to the sea. Two dragons playing with a pearl. After Chen Shi pulled Qin Shui back a few hundred meters, he looked up at the strong light. But after a mere 10 seconds, he suddenly realized that a black shadow suddenly appeared in the strong light. This familiar scene immediately made Qin Shi frown deeply. But in an instant, many thoughts flashed through his mind. Spirit energy exhaustion, strange phenomenon of heaven and earth, spirit energy recovery, heaven opening. His cheap father-in-law once said that the heavenly gate had not appeared for more than 100 years. In the understanding of great-granduncle and the others, the heavenly gate was the southern gate of the heavenly court. Just like in myths and legends, when the heavenly gate opened, mortals could ascend and become immortals. Chen Shi originally thought that with the spirit energy situation on Earth, it was absolutely impossible to breed high-level immortal cultivators, so he had never taken the heavenly gate issue to heart. In Chen Shi's understanding, the Elysium was just a legend on Earth. But combined with the recent series of events, he had finally figured it out. Even though there were no immortal cultivators on Earth now, it didn't mean that there weren't any in the past. They just left. He went to a place called the Heavenly Gate by later generations. Weren't those old fogies in the village dreaming of the day when the gate of heaven would open again and take them to the celestial world? The heavenly gate should be a large-scale teleportation array. Xian Nu's spirit was the coordinates of the array that connected the two realms. As for the so-called immortal realm, it was probably a cultivation holy land similar to the heavenly jade domain. Because the spiritual energy on Earth was too sparse, the only way to maintain the connection between the two realms was to sacrifice Xian Nu's soul. As for that immortal general who had been killed, She thought that he was a helper that those old B** stars had found from somewhere. Come to think of it, divine generals, weren't they the immortal cultivators who left Earth? Otherwise, with the current cultivation conditions on Earth, the celestial being was already the limit. How could a divine general comparable to Yuanying be born? In the blink of an eye, She sorted out the conjectures in his mind. Because he left Earth, when he returned, he never thought that his home planet was actually a cultivation holy land similar to the heavenly jade domain. At this moment, She's heart was filled with mixed feelings, and an indescribable feeling suddenly gushed out. One had to know that his current state of mind was completely different from when he first returned. Because he had Nian, and at the same time, he had found Ying. They were a happy family. She had always been someone who cared about his wife and children. As long as the people he cared about were by his side, everything else did not matter. With the cultivation conditions on Earth, he might not be able to take another step toward the soul formation stage in this lifetime. However, She did not feel regret. Instead, he was optimistic that as long as Ying could cultivate to Yuanying, he would be very satisfied. She even thought that if Ying really could not cultivate to Yuanying, he could reluctantly accept the golden core stage. After all, 500 years was not a long time. A family could live happily together for 500 years. What kind of concept was that? Furthermore, even if he really could not accept the terrible ending of Ying leaving first and dying alone, he could at least try to bring Ying and Nian back to the heavenly jade domain and find a way to prolong their lives, right? The future was still early, and it was more important to live well in the present. Therefore, before Nian became an adult, She would not consider what the future would be like. However, what She did not expect was that reality was completely different from what he had imagined. Originally, he just wanted to retire and take care of his children on Earth, but he did not expect Earth to be a cultivation holy land comparable to the heavenly jade domain. At least, it used to be. This made She feel that it was very unreal. Could it be his peaceful and happy life was going to be broken? And the reason why She had such a feeling was that he knew how cruel the world of immortal cultivators was. Immortal cultivators were supposed to compete with the heavens and with people. Although there would always be people who naively thought that immortal cultivators could actually join hands and advance together, side by side. However, they neglected the most important problem. And that was, cultivation resources were limited. Although spirit chi could be continuously regenerated, and heavenly treasures could be regenerated indefinitely, the problem was, the lifespan of immortal cultivators was also limited. How to obtain more cultivation resources within their limited lifespan to continuously improve their realm was the problem that every immortal cultivator had to face. Natural selection, survival of the fittest. If one could not obtain more resources to improve themselves, then they were destined to be eliminated. What was the result of being eliminated? There was only one result, and that was death. This was the real world of immortal cultivators. Compared to the other divine lords in the heavenly jade domain, Shi's temperament was indeed much gentler, but he was not a person who liked to avoid problems. Since the problem had already appeared, then there was only one question left in his heart. Divine General. What level was he in the heavenly gate? The grudge had already been formed. If the other party did not pursue the matter, then Shi could also pretend that this matter did not happen. But if the other party wanted to pursue the matter, thinking of this, Shi could not help but ignite a burning desire to fight in his heart. In the past, he did not care about his life, and even if it was a narrow escape, he would still cross the void. But today was different from the past. As a man, every time he swung his sword, it was no longer for himself, but for his wife and children behind him. If he were to fall as well, what would happen to Yingying and Yanyan? Chen Shi's mind was full of thoughts. At this time, the black figure finally walked out of the strong light. But what made Chen Shi a little surprised was, after thinking for a while, she explained, Han Xiang's judgment can't be wrong. I think it's because there are too many impurities in this world's spiritual energy, which caused the previous judgment to be wrong. Now is not the time to discuss this. Since time is so tight, let's act according to what we discussed before. Shui Xiang will guard this place. I'll go find Gui Yao. Qing Wan, you go find Chang Li. What do you think? All right. After hearing the man in white's words, the woman and the man in green immediately nodded. If great-granduncle was still alive, perhaps he could determine the identities of the three people in front of him based on the contents recorded in the ancient books. Shui Xiang, Qing Wan, Bai Hong. And the divine general who had died under Chen Shi's sword combination, Chang Li. After a simple discussion, Qing Wan and Bai Hong instantly turned into streaks of light and flew in different directions. From the beginning to the end, the two of them didn't even look at Chen Shi. Perhaps to them, Chen Shi and Qin Shuai in front of them were just insects that could fly. Qing Wan and Bai Hong left. But the moment they left, the destroyer that had been parked in the distance suddenly raised its main cannon. Bang! Following the appearance of a burst of flames, the destroyer actually opened fire. And the position the cannon was aiming at was the strong light in the middle of the two waterspouts. One had to know that the woman called Shui Xiang was currently floating in the air at the location of the strong light. This sudden cannon shot really shocked everyone present. Sitting on the boat, Ijiro Saito stared in the direction of the destroyer in a daze. When he saw the cannonball smashing toward the position of the strong light at 3 times the speed of sound, Ijiro Saito's face suddenly showed a shocked and angry expression. He couldn't help but yell in the direction of the destroyer, "Baka!" With the continuous development of modern technology, the status of naval cannons had long been replaced by missiles. Therefore, naval cannons were generally only used in close-range defensive battles or warning shots. This cannon shot was a warning issued by the U.S. Army. It was a warning to the 3 people who suddenly appeared from the strong light not to act rashly and obediently accept their interrogation. The firing rate of naval cannons was as high as 1,000 meters per second. Therefore, in less than 2 seconds, the cannonball had already hit the woman's position. The woman was stunned for a moment, as if she didn't expect the insects in front of her to dare to attack her. Because she was too angry, a hint of red flashed across the woman's face. Then she waved her sleeves fiercely, frowned, and widened her eyes. She shouted in the direction of the destroyer, "You're asking for it." As the woman waved her sleeves, she grabbed with her slender hand and a huge burst of energy suddenly burst out. The wind is tight, retreat. The woman had only casually raised a huge wave, and it was enough to frighten this Yin-Yang Liao executive, who scrambled away like a dog. Fortunately, the woman didn't seem to want to argue with these ants in front of her, so when she saw Ijiro running away, she turned her eyes back to Chen Shi and Qin Shuai. This was the 3rd time she had set her eyes on the 2 of them. Therefore, the moment she looked at Qin Shuai, he felt as if he had fallen into an ice cave, and all the hair on his body stood on end. Seeing this, Qin Shuai could only tilt his head slightly and whisper to Chen Shi, "Mr. Chen, how about, let's go?" Although Qin Shuai didn't know what level of strength the woman in front of him had reached, he knew very well, this woman was definitely not someone he could mess with, so he subconsciously wanted to leave here. Qin Shuai proposed his idea, but Chen Shi didn't seem to hear him. Instead, he turned his head and looked in the direction of the destroyer with interest. At the same time, the woman in the air seemed to have noticed something, so she quickly turned her head and saw 2 missiles suddenly shot out of the sea. The missiles broke through the surface of the sea, and after flying to a certain height, they suddenly turned the warhead and blasted directly in the direction of the woman. At the same time as the missiles were fired, several figures suddenly emerged from the bottom of the sea. It was the group of United States soldiers. But what was strange was that these soldiers were all wearing a set of metal armor-like equipment at the moment, so from a distance, they looked like a group of robot soldiers. This should be the exoskeleton armor secretly developed by the United States. I didn't expect this technology to be mature enough to be used in actual combat. Qin Shuai's reaction was also extremely fast. After seeing the appearance of this group of robot soldiers, he quickly explained to Qin Shi. Mechanical exoskeleton armor. This was a project that the United States had been deeply researching and developing in recent years. The purpose was to allow ordinary soldiers to have extraordinary combat capabilities. Chen Shi's eyesight was much better than Qin Shuai's, so he saw it very clearly. The shape of these exoskeleton armors was somewhat similar to the mass-produced version of Iron Man 2. The United States had only been founded for more than 200 years, so naturally, they didn't have as deep a cultural heritage as Huaxia. Although they didn't have martial artists or necromancers, they could make ordinary soldiers have the strength to fight with martial artists through research and technology. And once the research and development was successful, it meant mass production. Because of the root aptitude and other reasons, ordinary people may not be able to reach transforming strength in their lifetime. But as long as they wore the exoskeleton armor, even ordinary people could instantly have the powerful strength of a transforming strength warrior. It was conceivable that an army composed entirely of transforming strength warriors would be so formidable. This was the fundamental reason why the United States were so domineering. Because Shui Xiang directly smashed the destroyer, it was obvious that she and the United States were in a situation where one of them had to die. Looking at the dense rocket barrage constantly bombarding Shui Xiang, Qin Shuai was so shocked that he couldn't close his mouth. Even Qin Shi couldn't help but think of a joke at this moment that made him feel a little bit awkward. Iron Man versus the ancient cultivators? Boom! 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 After 2 missiles, countless shoulder-fired rockets bombarded the woman in midair one after another. Like fireworks during the New Year, the rockets continued to explode one after another. In an instant, the thick smoke produced by the explosion filled the entire sky. The United States were rich, so they were never stingy with ammunition. Therefore, after a full round of bombardment, the leading soldier finally raised his right hand, clenched his fist, and made a gesture to stop the attack. But the moment they stopped the bombardment, a scream full of anger suddenly resounded throughout the sky. Because a soldier couldn't dodge in time, he was pierced by those tiny water arrows on the spot. Accompanied by a heart-wrenching scream, the unlucky soldier fell from the sky like a wild goose that had been shot by an arrow. Pull up, pull up. The thrusters were fully activated, and the remaining soldiers instantly flew hundreds of meters into the air. But it was a pity. Although their flying speed was fast, the water arrows shot from the sea were much faster than them. Therefore, in just a few seconds, more than half of this elite team whose combat power could be said to be the world's top elite team had been killed or injured. Calling headquarters, requesting. Seeing that the situation was not right, the leading soldier immediately wanted to ask for support from headquarters. But before he could even finish speaking, a water arrow comparable to a laser directly pierced through the exoskeleton armor on his body. Blood rained down, and the entire world was quiet. Shui Xiang turned her head again and looked at the 2 people not far away. This was already the 4th time she looked at Qin Shi and Qin Shuai. Therefore, Qin Shuai suddenly felt like he was being stared at by a prehistoric beast. This also made him finally realize that death was so close to him. Under Shui Xiang's expressionless gaze, Qin Shuai didn't even dare to breathe. Every second felt like a year. But luckily for him, after Shui Xiang stared at them for a full 3 seconds, she didn't attack the 2 of them. Instead, she spat out a word coldly. Get out. Hearing this, Qin Shuai suddenly felt like he had been pardoned. In a moment of excitement, he grabbed Qin Shi's arm a little rudely, and then quickly whispered, Mr. Qin, let's go. If we don't go now, I'm afraid we won't be able to leave. To be honest, if it weren't for Chinshi's reluctance to leave, he would have already run away like Ijiro Sai too. It was fine to watch the show, but he couldn't throw his life away, right? Perhaps sensing the fear in Qin Shuai's heart, Chinshi didn't mean to blame him. Instead, he reached out and patted the back of his hand. You go first, I still have something to talk to her alone. Before Qin Shuai could react, an invisible force pushed him out. Mr. Chen. You. Qin Shuai struggled, wanting to say something, but his mouth was blocked by Chen Shi's true essence. This scene also made Shui Xiang, who had been expressionless, instantly change her expression. This man, who didn't have the slightest fluctuation of spirit energy on his body, was actually a celestial being? Did she make an error in judgment? Shui Xiang was a little bewildered. But at this time, Qin Shi was like a tourist climbing a mountain. Step by step, he walked in the air and slowly rose to Shui Xiang's height. Who are you? Until now, Shui Xiang hadn't noticed any signs of spirit energy fluctuations on Qin Shi's body. How was this possible? Shui Xiang frowned slightly, and the expression on her face couldn't help but become much more dignified. Chen Shi heard Shui Xiang's question, but he didn't mean to answer. Instead, he asked, Do you know, there is a weapon in this world called a nuclear bomb? What is it? It seems that you don't know. Looking at Shui Xiang's puzzled face, Qin Shi didn't mean to explain. Instead, he continued, Actually, I'm very curious. Can you withstand a nuclear bomb attack? Hearing this, a trace of displeasure flashed across Shui Xiang's face. Although she didn't know what a nuclear bomb was, since the man in front of her mentioned the word weapon and attack, it naturally aroused her vigilance. Pretending to be mysterious, then I'll test how strong you are. Following a cold snort, Shui Xiang's slender hand moved, and a water arrow suddenly shot out from the sea. Seeing this, Qin Shi didn't move at all. Instead, he said calmly, Under normal circumstances, I don't fight with women, but in order to avoid unnecessary trouble in the future, I can only tell you today, I'm sorry. As his voice fell, a long sword suddenly appeared in Qin Shi's hand. Dharma. Chapter 288. Shui Xiang couldn't help but frown the moment she saw the appearance of the godly sword Dharma form. You actually used the Dharma form as a weapon? There was some doubt in her tone, but at the same time, there was some amazement. Without a doubt, Shui Xiang understood the usage of the Dharma form very well. But it was precisely because of this that she felt rather surprised. Dharma form, it could actually be used like this? Shui Xiang had never seen anyone use the Dharma form as a weapon since she started cultivating. Could it be that this mysterious man in front of her didn't even have a suitable Dharma treasure weapon? Or was it because this man didn't even put her in his eyes, so he didn't even want to use a Dharma treasure? The moment this conjecture appeared in Shui Xiang's mind, she couldn't suppress the raging anger in her heart. He was just an ant from the lower realm, and he actually dared to look down on her like this? He was simply arrogant to the extreme. I originally didn't want to kill more people, but you insisted on committing suicide. Since that's the case, then I'll do as you wish and personally send you on your way. As her voice fell, Shui Xiang stretched out her right hand and pointed fiercely at Qin Shi. Then, the aqua-blue cloak that had been wrapped around her hand suddenly seemed to come alive. After it circled around her arm, it was like a little blue snake that shot straight towards Qin Shi. The so-called cloak referred to the silk and satin gauze that ancient women wrapped around their arms. It could also be called a long damask and was purely a decorative item. The woman held the cloak in her hand. When she stood, the cloak naturally hung down like a calm pool of water. When she walked, it fluttered and stretched like a willow tree in the wind. How beautiful was the combination of movement and stillness! Shui Xiang danced with the long damask, like a fairy flying out of a Dunhuang mural. Seeing this, Qin Shi didn't have the slightest intention of underestimating her. Instead, he gripped the hilt of his sword tightly and ferociously channeled all the vital energy in his body into the long sword. So much so that the long sword in his hand suddenly glowed with a strong light. And the reason why Qin Shi was so cautious was because, This cloak was Shui Xiang's natal Dharma treasure, azure billowing silk gauze. After the long damask flew out from Shui Xiang's hand, it suddenly became bigger and instantly became like a curtain that covered the entire sky. Seeing that the situation was not right, Chen Shi immediately rose into the air, wanting to fly out of the area covered by the long silk. However, what Chen Shi did not expect was that Chang Ling's speed was quite fast. It was like a big net falling from the sky, covering Chen Shi's head in an instant. Then, it tightened bit by bit like wrapping a dumpling, wrapping Chen Shi firmly. Chen Shi brandished his long sword, trying to split the long silk. However, this long silk seemed to be made of water. After the sword pierced into it, it did not encounter any resistance. No matter how Chen Shi slashed, the long silk did not show any signs of damage. Chen Shi tried to touch the long silk with his hand, wanting to tear it apart. However, he found that the long silk had become extraordinarily sturdy. No matter how hard he tried, it was futile. It could be said to be both soft and hard. In the face of this unbreakable long silk, Chen Shi had no way to break it. He could only watch as he was wrapped in the long silk like a mummy. Looking at how the azure billowing silk gauze tied up Chen Shi so easily, Shui Xiang could not help but laugh contemptuously. "You only have this little ability?" She thought that this man might have some ability. She did not expect that he was just a guy who was strong in appearance but weak in reality. It may be more than that. Even though he was tied up like a dumpling, Chen Shi's face still did not show any expression of panic. Instead, he calmly replied to her, "You don't know life from death." Shui Xiang glanced at him and then waved her arm. An icicle suddenly appeared not far from Chen Shi's forehead. Looking at that posture, Shui Xiang probably wanted to use the icicle to cut open his head. However, at this critical juncture, Chen Shi did not seem to be anxious at all. Instead, he suddenly smiled and said, "Let me give you a piece of advice. When you are fighting with others, don't let your guard down, especially behind you." Hearing this, Shui Xiang could not help but frown and quickly turned to look behind her. At this time, she found that the divine sword Dharma idol was not far behind her when she did not know when. The divine sword was slightly blooming with a strange light, but Shui Xiang could not detect any signs of spiritual energy fluctuations on this sword at all. Until, when the divine sword Dharma idol suddenly flew toward her, Shui Xiang finally realized that it contained a huge amount of spiritual energy. "You shameless!" A lion would use all its strength to hunt a rabbit. Even if the opponent was a woman, even if the method used was despised, Chen Shi still chose to take her down in a way that was close to a sneak attack. In fact, when Shui Xiang was fighting with the group of United States guys just now, Chen Shi had quietly set up a large aura concealing array and used it to show weakness to the enemy in order to catch them off guard. Shui Xiang was indeed tricked. Perhaps she did not even think that this man, in addition to being far more powerful than her, would actually use a sneak attack method. When the aura concealing array could not hide the spiritual energy fluctuations contained in the divine sword Dharma idol, Shui Xiang finally realized how terrifying this man in front of her was. Setting the universe as the god, the Qin Kuan sword finger. Man and earth worship heaven for the heavenly sword. The three famous swords, heavenly sword.